Welcome back to the Mirror Point. Today, we're diving into one of the deepest questions we could even ask, I think. Is meaning and purpose something real in our universe, or just a psychological illusion that we create for survival purposes only? So to understand why this question hits so hard with me today is because we need to recognize the materialist shift of the 20th century. As scientific reductionism took center stage, the richer human vision of thinkers like, say, Friedrich Schiller were sort of pushed aside. You know, Schiller, who was a philosopher, believed that art, beauty, and aesthetic experience were essential for human freedom and moral maturity. But materialism replaced all of this with a picture of humans as biological machines in a very indifferent sort of cosmos. Then we have Immanuel Kant, the father of German idealism. And he argued that the human mind actively shapes reality. And then we have physicist Alfred North Whitehead. Though not an idealist himself, he did develop something he called organic realism. And this is a process-based view of the world influenced by idealist insights and deeply critical of strict materialism. He was not a fan of materialism at all. In Whitehead's universe, everything is interconnected, relational, and infused with value because we are part of the universe within it. So the worldview was captured, you know, this new materialist worldview I'm talking about was really kind of captured famously by Richard Dawkins, who wrote that the universe has, quote unquote, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, right? So meanwhile, while all of this is going on and being accepted into the cultural milieu, our culture is now struggling. Traditional frameworks for meaning are collapsing, with over 1/3 of young adults identifying as religiously unaffiliated. I'm not affiliated with religion either, mind you. But most striking of all is a 2023 Harvard Graduate School of Education report found that 58% of young adults aged 18 to 25 have said that they have no purpose or meaning in life. That's their experience, which is pretty shocking and sad if you ask me. So today we're just asking, are we truly living in a meaningless universe, or have we simply lost the tools to perceive a meaning? So I want to just explore this together. So I want to just bring on my co-host. How you doing, Sophia? What's happening? And you are muted, my dear. My dear.
Can y'all hear me? I'm sorry. I'm having technical issues again.
Yeah, you good. We can hear you now. How's it going?
Okay, it's going great, except for the technical issues.
The technical issues. Okay,
but that's a good question. Yeah, as usual, you know. That's a good question. And I think I already know where my mind's going on that. But yeah, that's a very good question you just posed.
Oh, cool. And we have
hi everyone.
Yeah. And we have our other co-host, Objective Ethics, with us today. How you doing, brother? Good. And so I had a question though regarding this whole question of meaning, because a lot of people say that without, you know, I was speaking on this topic with a Christian evangelical last week, and this is sort of what prompted this whole conversation. And he was saying, I understand as an idealist, you believe that the universe or that you believe that there's just nature and we're all just part of nature and everything is one thing, it's just nature. And he goes, but I think that this is very atheistic and it lacks meaning. And he goes, and you'll never find meaning if you look at the world that way. If you just see yourself as part of nature and not part of God's plan as a special creation that God imbues meaning on you, then basically all you're going to believe in is the cold death of the universe billions of years from now. And then what's the point? You have no meaning in life at that point. So he said that, if the world is going to dissolve away, then why do anything? Why even do your little show that you do? That's what he asked me. Why would you even care to do it, since there's no meaning in the world, according to an idealist point of view? And so my question, and I'll kind of pose it to you guys. I said, well, I don't really believe that. I said, in fact, you could be a cancer patient. Let's say you knew and I'll ask you guys this question, what your answer would be. Let's say there was a cancer patient who only had, and he knew for sufficient reasons, he only had 1 week to live. But he also knew that 6 months from now, there was an asteroid coming to the earth, was going to destroy the earth 6 months after he's dead. He had sufficient reasons to know this. Everybody in the world knew this, right? Now, he's a writer. He had all kinds of goals in life, meaning, purpose, things he wanted to leave behind. Knowing that the world is going to be obliterated in 6 months, do you think this person would find meaning in life, knowing that he's going to be dead in a week from now and that the world was going to end 6 months later? Do you think this person would have meaning? Or do you think that just kills all the meaning in life? What do you think, Sophia?
Okay, so the question is if the cancer patient would have meaning? Like, you mean if he felt like he had a purpose in life, a meaningful purpose?
Yeah, even though the world was going to end in 6 months.
I would say probably not. He would probably feel like there's no point in this. It would be very depressive, to say the least.
Yeah, that's what most people say. That's what most people say. What about you, Objective Ethics? What would your answer be?
I think it completely depends on his perspective. I mean, I could see, if whatever his disposition is, I could see the answer going a lot of different ways. There's not enough background information on this person's belief system, his quote unquote worldview, stuff like that. So I could see it going a lot of different ways. It would be the ultimate test of where your value system lies and what your worldview is, because most of the world would go into complete chaos if everybody was on the same page with that information. If it was just him, it might be kind of interesting. It's an interesting thought experiment, but without having more details on this person's disposition, I wouldn't really be able to say either way.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and the point was that it is kind of.
What I would say though is.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that question is not the right question. So here we go with that. Because as a mystic, I think that, how would I put this? It's not about the individual. You know what I'm saying? It's about consciousness evolving. So even if the world were to be destroyed tomorrow, that wouldn't mean that consciousness would cease to exist. So in other words, there is a greater purpose for things. It's not just based on like an individual perspective. If that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And my answer is kind of similar to that. I'm not a mystic or anything, but I would say that my viewpoint is that this whole time thing doesn't really matter. It only matters depending on the way we understand value and meaning. Some people put so much emphasis on the time thing, right? Like for me, whether the world continues for another 6 months or whether the world continues for another billion years doesn't really matter, because I'm going to die anyways. And so the whole purpose of leaving a mark or leaving some kind of meaning isn't for me necessarily. It's for whoever I can touch at any point in time, right? So like, you can find meaning in the very smallest things of your life. If you could be a cancer patient given 2 weeks to live, I believe you could actually find meaning for your life within that 2 weeks. And it may even help you to survive in some cases. I don't see how being depressed and finding no meaning is going to help you or help anyone. And so I think that gets to the core issue that, we find meaning not for necessarily for ourselves necessarily, if that makes sense, but for what we can help, even if it's one other person for any amount of time. If I can make a person who only has a week to live happy in his last week, that could be meaning for me. That could be meaningful for me. There's so many ways to look at it. And I think that this sort of evangelical Christian guy's look is kind of limited. He's looking at it like, hey, the concert's only going to last for 2 hours. So why even go? It's going to end. So why even experience it? What's the meaning of going to a concert or an orchestra to enjoy it? It's going to end. So what's the point? And it's like, you're missing the point. The point is about experience, And anyways, I just wanted to ask that question. Something else that,
Yeah, but then we have to ask,
yeah, go ahead.
we have to ask,
Yep, go ahead.
what is meaning though? What is meaning? Like, we need to define what meaning is. I get your point. You're saying that, if a cancer patient then dies in 2 weeks, feels like he has no meaning because he's only around for 2 more weeks. Then, we could say, well, what the hell? There's no meaning in life then because we're all going to die. So the thing is though, what is meaning? That's what we need to figure out. And so I would say that meaning is just consciousness recognizing patterns within itself, just like we do as human beings. And the meaning is just that. And it's because consciousness, once again, is trying to know itself by recognizing its own patterns, which is self-reflection. So that is how consciousness evolves. And so I would say that meaning is a direct thing that ties into meaning directly ties into evolution.
Yes. Yeah. And for me also, even in a more immediate sense, it helps you to enjoy your experience while you're here. Most studies show that most people who fall into depression and suicide are people that lack two things. They lack a feeling of control and a feeling of meaning in their life. It's easier to give up. It's easier to give in to this. This is why we have this crisis. People have bought into the belief that in order for anything to be meaningful, it's going to have to come from some objective source that's going to be greater than themselves. For example, like the Christian guy I was talking to, his whole premise was without an objective source, God, to give you meaning, which he described as meaning is to glorify God. When God gives you that meaning in your life, it gives you purpose that you can strive for. And that's what's going to make you feel better in this life. And also, when you die, you go to heaven and you worship God forever and ever. Amen, as Revelation says. That's the meaning of life. But on atheism or on idealism or naturalism, there is none of that. But this runs into something that Alex O'Connor calls the paperclip problem, which I thought was pretty interesting. It's like, imagine that we've created a conscious AI computer somehow, right? Suppose this AI robot was conscious, and we gave that machine the meaning, the purpose of creating paper clips. That's his whole purpose, is to create paper clips. Do you think that this AI robot would be happy with his existence? Because after all, it came from his creator, and it is an objective meaning or purpose. Suppose this AI robot was something like human beings, that it had that same sort of curiosity, that same sort of will to expand their experience. Do you think that just having that goal to make paper clips for the rest of its life is very fulfilling? I mean, I don't think so. I think this is a problem that is inherent with a lot of this objective authority that gives you meaning, that gives you your purpose. If it doesn't come from, if it doesn't feel like it comes from yourself, then it doesn't seem to be very fulfilling, Anyways, what are your thoughts on that objective?
Well, this is a really interesting topic because I recently had a discussion with a Christian nationalist who's got a pretty big name. She ran with Charlie Kirk. Her name is Gothix, Gothix, Gothix. And she's a fundamentalist Christian. She ran with Charlie Kirk at Turning Point USA. And Brooklyn Liu had a debate with her, about a couple months ago now at this point. And I saw that debate, and she really ran Brooklyn Liu over the coals because of his views on subjective moralism. And she kind of pinned him down on that, and then it divulged into nihilism. And so I thought, I'm going to reach out to this lady and have a conversation with her, because I wanted to stick up for Brooklyn Liu, for one thing, because I know Brooklyn Liu. He's a really nice guy. He's a really smart guy. And even though I disagree with his views on morality, obviously I'm an objective moral guy. I believe in moral realism. I really enjoy Liu, and I just felt bad for him. She made him look kind of bad. And so I went in and approached her, said, "Hey, do you want to have a conversation about those things you talked to Lou about?" She says, "Yeah." So I went and I talked to her twice, once about morality and once about nihilism. And it's really interesting, the whole nihilism thing, because what I've observed as an agnostic from the outside looking in is that most atheists, in fact, up until just last night, it turns out I do have a friend who I interact with who is a nihilist. But other than that, I didn't know that I had known any nihilists at all. And I interact with a lot of atheists and agnostics because I'm in that community. And I've never heard a single atheist or agnostic say they're a nihilist. And again, last night I did have one person. But on the flip side of that, almost all of the theists that I talk to actually are nihilists. They believe that without God, there's no meaning in life. And they're very vocal about that. And in fact, I've even had one of the reasons I do not try to deconvert people is because I've had Christians tell me that if they found out that God wasn't real, they would want to kill themselves because life would have no meaning. I've literally heard people say that, and that really freaks me out. I'm like, holy fuck, So that's like just a word to the wise out there. If you're an atheist or agnostic and you're trying to deconvert people, I would think really carefully about doing that, because there's a reason that people are religious. You can try to convince people to make more humane, more secular human decisions when it comes to voting laws, gay marriage, abortion, these kind of things. You know what I mean? We could try to encourage them to make better decisions. But as far as talking them out of their religion, I don't think that's a good idea, because of this nihilism. A lot of religious people are nihilists. They do not understand that we have the capacity, not only the capacity, but I would argue that we have the duty to give life meaning and to contribute meaning to life for other people. It's a double-edged, it's kind of a two-sided coin there. Not only are we giving ourselves meaning in life, but we have a duty as a social species and as part of this connected universe to give meaning to other people, to provide meaning for the universe. That's really what we're here for. And so I think, when it comes to this nihilism thing, a lot of people who hear about nihilism, and another version of that is called existentialism. They really have a misunderstanding. If they don't study the philosophy behind it, if they just take it at face value, it sounds very depressing. It really does. And I grant that. But if you actually study the philosophers who we get these ideas from, Nietzsche would be probably the most popular philosopher that people consider to be a nihilist. But nihilism goes back further than Nietzsche. There's a beautiful novel written by a Russian guy, Ivan Turgenev. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he wrote a novel in the mid 1800s called Fathers and Sons, and he's really one of the earlier people that we think of with nihilism. And in his novel, the son, the character, he comes to this point to where he realizes there's no meaning in life, right? And so he goes through this very major bout of depression, and he gets just really down, thinking what life has no meaning. And then he falls in love, and he overcomes his nihilism through this process of falling in love. And it's a beautiful story. It's even today, I would recommend anybody check that book out. Nietzsche himself, who a lot of people credit with nihilism, he actually has an entire philosophy, including a philosophy on ethics and morals, of how you actually overcome nihilism, the depression of nihilism, because that for Nietzsche, it was the beauty of life is actually in the experience itself. And so he has this in his philosophical model. He has this development process that a person goes through when they abandon their religious beliefs, right? Because Nietzsche was, he believed in a spirit or soul essence, but he was an anti-theist, right? He really was pushing back against, because he saw so many problems with the church and what was happening with the church, but not to get into too much of that. But anyway, so Nietzsche, he was like, hey, what happens when we abandon these God concepts? Well, what meaning do we have in life? And so he spent years developing this, and he actually came to the conclusion there is a tremendous value in life. And the goal is you progress through on this level to where you become what he called the Uberman. Oftentimes it's translated as power man. And the power man basically is what Buddhists might consider to be a truly enlightened person, where he understands, very much like a Taoist would understand, that the beauty of life is in the experience itself, which means you have to have a proper mental understanding of the bad times as well as the good times. You don't get too high with the good times, you don't get too low with the bad times, because the whole purpose is the experience itself. And when you can really embrace this type of mentality, it makes it much easier to go through life, because every single human being knows that we are going to struggle. We're going to have some really nasty, dirty shit happen to us. And we're going to see stuff. We're going to witness stuff. We're going to experience stuff personally. It's unavoidable. And at the same token, even as dark as your life is, and I've been in some pretty dark, lowly places myself, and I can tell you there's beauty to be found in everything. You just got to find it. But it will, you know what I mean? So the whole point of what I'm getting at here is that it's really the experience. And once you understand that the experience, it's about the journey itself. You've heard the saying that life is a journey, not a destination. And that is where the purpose comes from, is the experience itself. I believe that in my own personal views, my own personal worldview, that we are literally here for the purpose of consciousness experiencing itself. Very much, Sophia said it so brilliantly a couple weeks ago, and I'll never forget. I'm so glad that she shared it with us. But she said that when we look at other people, we see ourselves in other people. It's like a mirror, how we can see inside of ourselves. And I thought that was so powerful, and I agree with her 100%. And so that's really the point of this life. So once you understand that that's where the value is, every experience you have is valuable, good or bad experience. And it takes a strong mind to put it all into proper context, but you can do it. Anyways, that was a long tangent. Sorry.
That's beautiful.
Welcome to mysticism, my brother.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. That's awesome. It is, because you do see yourself in
That's what
others.
we've been trying to fight, man.
You know, you can look in people and you see, you can see the bad parts of yourself, the good parts of yourself. It's just that duality is where you derive that meaning in everything, that dualistic sort of experience. And it's a wonderful thing. And we have someone who's joined the stage with us. Chris Moore, how you doing, brother? Nice to see you come back, man.
Hello.
Hey, how
Anyway,
you
Hello.
doing?
yeah. Kind of. Well, kind of like a bit baffled that objective just basically speed run thus spoke Zarathustra. But anyway, that's cool. Anyway,
Mhm.
sorry. I'm talking about one of Nietzsche's famous works. But anyway, um. So
Hey,
yeah, I
I've
just
got
kind of
something to
saw.
say about that. Yeah. Go ahead. I want to follow up on that when you're done.
Yeah, well, technically, I just kind of saw the title, and yeah. However, with you, well, your opinion about atheists basically being careful with the the opinion, well, not no, not to deconstruct, well, to of deconstruction, ethical
Deconversion.
deconstruction, well, deconversion or ethical deconversions or whatever. The problem is that the if you kind of like the pushback that I want to get is that if you basically switch switch sides on like the shoe on the other foot, is that essentially, well, theists in general, and I'm not essentially just like not talking about like you two guys up here, but it's just that it's not the same grace is not exactly afforded to, because to like for most theists is that the existence of no god, or us being essentially alone, being masters of our own destinies, equals nihilism, equals there's no point in life, and it's just like automatically just like goes to that conclusion, and thus it's like the knee jerk reaction is to just like just kind of keep pretending, not pretending, but just kind of keep force feed the idea that that the other side's like, well, as in non-believers, it's just it's like, oh, the like they're stupid, they're it's like they're delusional and all that stuff, and it's just that shuffle around just to muddy the waters so that the well, not the illusion, but the claim of legitimacy. I'm trying to basically being generous over here with my words, but the claims of legitimacy of my position can be still be upheld in a way. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's like an appeal to consequence fallacy when theists say that without their God, that you're going to find no meaning in life and you should be depressed and a nihilist. I think that's just an overgeneralization that and really it's a setup, because I used to be a theist before too. I used to believe in God too a long time ago. And that was the one thing I was scared of, is that if I left my religion and I left belief in God, then I would have no more meaning in life. And I could see myself just sort of spiraling into this life of, I would be like one of these drug addicts or one of these people that found no meaning, then anything goes. And I would pretty much just commit suicide slowly. But all of that was just a fallacy, because actually I found more meaning in my life after leaving religion. In fact, it was actual meaning because I actually let, nature work through me, rather than me having this idea of a invisible man in the sky give me what my meaning should be. That wasn't meaning. That's just more like divine authority or something, in my life. So I found the opposite, but that's just me. But unfortunately, I also knew a lot of people who left the church who did end up committing suicide, that did end up doing a lot of bad things, going to prison because they lost their anchor. You know, they bought into the lie that you have to have this religion in order to find that meaning. But that's been my experience, you know, and it's sad.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, and I
horrible.
think that ultimately, whether you're an atheist or whatever you want to identify as, I think what ultimately gives us meaning is that as we get older, we understand that life continues with or without you. So it's no longer that you just live for yourself. You want to, like objective ethics said earlier, you actually want to affect the lives of others. You want to do things that change the world for the better. And that has nothing so much to do with yourself than it does with like the future generation. So everything you do now in this life, you know, affects the next generation. And I think we all intuitively know that, you know. So yeah, I agree that there's no God needed, no religious authority needed to create meaning. I think we just innately know that life goes on no matter what. So you make the best of it.
Absolutely.
And I was speaking to my mother. She came by and brought me some Thanksgiving dinner yesterday. And we were speaking, and she knows I have certain problems. You know, she knows that I suffer from anxiety and am prone to depression. So she came over and she was just asking, look, I know that you're unemployed. I know you love to work. I know you like to be productive. Now you don't even have a car. You're waiting for your car to get out the shop. You haven't been doing much. And I just worry about you. Are you making it okay? Is everything okay with your anxiety? And I know how you are. And I said, yeah. I said, actually, I have. And I work on it every day. And part of the reason that helps, what gives me a fight my depression and fight my anxiety is like doing things like writing music, doing this podcast, meeting people like yourselves and having these sort of conversations. These things in themselves give me meaning, right? And whether they're really that far reaching to people or not really doesn't really matter. I've come to learn it's just having a goal and having something to work for, just feeling like you have this sense of control. Now, I don't believe in free will ultimately, but I do believe that we have a sense of control in our life, and it's a healthy feeling. It helps motivate us, it helps us to get going in the morning, and then having this meaning, whether it's just to write an article or write a piece of music or put this podcast together, all that stuff gives my mind something to focus on that's meaningful to me, you know. And this is what has fought against my anxiety lately, and I'm glad for that.
Well, I just want to follow up on what couple things here. What Chris said. First of all, and this I don't want to detract from the conversation, but I had
Mhm.
an interesting conversation with a philosophy teacher online some time ago, specifically regarding what Chris brought up in the works of Nietzsche. Thus spoke Zarathustra, and I haven't done a complete study or deep dive into that book. So there may be things that I'm sure there's stuff in there that I'm not aware of, but my overview of it and the things I have read, he really doesn't get into Zoroastrianism. It's more basic concepts from Zarathustra's philosophical approach. Good word, good deeds, good thoughts. I believe it is. Yeah, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Yeah, that's Zarathustra's kind of concept construct. He said, in fact, to quote him directly, I think Zarathustra said, "The road to righteousness is paved with good thoughts, good words, and good deeds." Right. And another thing that he said was, um, "Good deeds are worth 100 or are worth 10,000 prayers." Right. So he had a lot of great wisdom and stuff like that. But for Zoroastrianism, the good deeds is a huge part of the religion, the philosophy of that religion. And I think Zoroastrianism is actually a beautiful religion. And just for a very quick to tie that all together with Christianity, well, first of all, Judaism, Second Temple Judaism was very heavily influenced by Zoroastrianism. For people who haven't studied into the history of that, very heavily influenced into that. This is where we get the dichotomy, if you will, of the good versus evil. In Zoroastrianism, you have Angra who represents the lie, and Spenta who represents the truth, right? So you get that because the Persian period, when the Persians freed the Jews to go back, when they conquered Babylon and they freed the Jews, so they were in diaspora, they had been exiled, so the Persians came in with Cyrus the Great, right? And he actually frees the Jews. In fact, if you read the Hebrew Bible, the very first mention of the Messiah is actually Cyrus the Great. You'll find that in Isaiah, I think chapter 41 or something like that. And it's talking about how Isaiah was the Lord's Messiah, because he really did. If it wasn't for Persia, there would be no Jews today, but probably, or at least there wouldn't be what it is today. And so the Persians were Zoroastrians, right? And so you see a lot of that influence. It's a huge paradigm shift in the Old Testament from the first 5 books of the law into the prophets. And this is during this period here. And so with Zoroastrianism, you see that paradigm shift. And then you see influences later on into Christianity with the concept of how heaven and hell is supposed to work, with how the Messiah is supposed to come. There's supposed to be this great battle between good and evil, and Jesus is supposed to be leading this army. That all comes from Zoroastrianism. So it's had a huge influence on the world today, indirectly through Christianity and Judaism. But with Nietzsche, I really believe, and this is just a theory, but I actually believe that he intentionally named his book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, not because he really used a lot from Zarathustra's philosophy, or Zoroaster in particular, but because Nietzsche was such an anti-Christian, anti-Catholic person. He wasn't just an anti-theist, but he was a former, I believe, Catholic or Protestant. No, I can't remember which, but he was former Christian. And he was raised in that. He was formally trained in that. He studied the history. He was very well educated, very highly educated. And once he figured out it was all bullshit, he got basically like ostracized by the religious community and isolated. So that's when he started really writing all of his stuff. And so I believe, my theory is that he actually specifically used Zoroastrianism or Zarathustra as a way to dig, kind of take a cheap shot at Christianity, because Christians fucking hate it when you bring up Zoroastrianism. They hate when you bring up the history of that religion. They want to believe it's all divine and inspired and all this stuff, and they don't want to believe the actual history. They do not want to accept the fact that Judaism was very polytheistic and henotheistic before Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is considered to be the oldest monotheistic religion. Right now, there's a little bit of hints of something. There was a particular period in Egypt where one of the kings wanted to go to monotheism, but it was really more henotheism. Zoroastrianism is really the oldest monotheistic religion, but people misunderstand it as being dualistic because of what I mentioned with the good versus the evil. This Angra Spenta. This is not polytheism. Ahura Mazda in Zoroastrianism is the only uncreated being. There is only one God in Zoroastrianism, not multiple gods. And so people really misunderstand that today, because people do tend to think it's dualism. It's dualistic, and it's not. It's actually monotheistic. And Jews and Christians both hate the fact that Judaism was polytheistic until Zoroastrianism influence. That's when it became monotheistic. So anyway, and I think that Nietzsche knew all this, and he specifically chose Zarathustra in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So I'm sorry, I know that was a tangent, but when Chris said that, I had to fucking follow up on that right there. That's just so interesting. And I could be wrong about my theory. I could be wrong.
No, you're good.
Well, Sophia will back me up on this. We had a so-called Zoroastrian guy that used to come on and do debates with me and debate me and Sophia.
The whole time.
You know who I'm talking about. And
Hell
the
yeah.
thing is, he said that morals and meaning always come from God, the Zoroastrian God. So he said, what he said was, he told us, because I put out a thought experiment. I said, well, wait a minute. Let me ask you a question then. If two guys were in two different banks and one guy's in line at the bank and he sees a camera up there in the ceiling and he knows he's being watched, and then the guy in front of him drops his $100 bill on the floor and he grabs it and he looks at the camera and he knows he's being watched, so he might as well hand it back to the guy. So he hands it back to the person, says, hey, you dropped this $100 bill. And the guy's like, thank you. Okay. Then you have person number two who's in a bank. He knows for certain that there's no camera in the bank at all. Same situation happens. The guy drops the $100 bill on the ground. He grabs the dollar bill, and although he knows he could get away with stealing it, he says, I'm not going to do anybody like that. So he taps the guy on the back, says, hey, you dropped the $100 bill. So I asked him, who is the more moral person of these two people? And he said, the guy who gave the $100 back, who was being watched, because the guy who gave it back, who was not being watched, did it out of his arrogance. So
Okay,
I don't know
that's
how
right.
that makes sense, but yeah.
This is really what this reminds me of is
He said that the person.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there must be a lag again. Yeah, he basically said that the person, because the question was, who is more moral? Is it the person that does the right thing on camera while they're being watched, or the person that does the right thing because they're being watched? And his argument was, it's the person that's being watched that's more moral, which is completely insane.
yeah,
and he's a
just
Zoroastrian,
he's
believe
just
it or not. And
he's
he's
just trying
also
to defend his
hardcore conservative. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just trying to. He knows he's being set up because he believes that he's being watched, and so he's going to try and make it look like that's the right answer. But that's obviously ridiculous. What this really
Right.
harkens to is one of Plato's greatest, and Plato had so many great works. But we have what they call the Euthyphro dilemma, right? Does God do things because they're good, or are they good because God does them? And that's a real backbreaker for Christianity when you have to wrestle with that whole dilemma.
Yeah, because if you do things because they're outside of God, then that makes God not that's an infringement on his omni properties, and so that kind of destroys his omni properties. And then if you say, well, we do things because God says, then you're arguing for arbitrariness, which is illogical, and it makes morals subjective. And then they're against subjective morality, remember? So yeah, it creates a big
That shit
dilemma.
makes my head hurt, man.
Just think of it as Spinoza territory, I guess. But anyway. So.
Yeah. What do you think, Sophia, from a mystical point of view? How does all that play out?
I just told you that shit makes my head hurt. On with the next topic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And it's the same thing with capital P, capital T truth, but also for, purpose, capital P purpose. You don't necessarily have to have this overarching universal purpose in order for things to really make sense in a person's life. I think it's more immediate than that and local. But the funny thing about that though is I was kind of like gearing up for this show. Michael Levin had a new interview, and he was being interviewed by physicist and a philosopher who wanted to kind of like figure out, well, Michael Levin, what the fuck are you trying to tell us? What are you talking about? So they had him on the interview, and he was, pretty much trying to lay out, what his views were. And he was saying, well, one of the guys was saying, well, for so long we've been taught, and the physicist guy goes, I'm not a biologist, I'm a physicist. But from what I understand, evolution is a blind process. There is no purpose, no intelligence in nature. And from what you're trying to say is that actually nature does have a purpose. It does have a capital P purpose in intention because of, can you explain how you've come to that belief? And, Michael Levin pretty much pointed out, his whole research with anthrobots and, and xenobots, and how these things just kind of demonstrate that internal intelligence, goal setting in nature. But he says, this is where we sort of emerge our sense of morality. He goes, this is tied in with morality and ethics. He goes, because if this is true, this means that ethics and morality is sort of objective in nature, because it's based on a pattern that actually exists in nature to push things to go a certain way according to how the pattern in nature evolves. And so he goes, so things like purpose, morality, ethics, all these things have an objective grounding. Now, people can disagree on what their goals are, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong, that it doesn't exist, because the facts are the facts,
Well,
but yeah, so go ahead.
I would say it's more of the fact that essentially morals and ethics kind of stem from the fact that we are a social species, essentially. It's the social contract of the fact is that, well, I kind of tell this with James Apperson about a couple of years ago, is that essentially just try to put like with the creationists and all that stuff, saying that there's like dinosaurs, like we were around, dinosaurs, and basically kind of like in a shortened version, try to just put Jurassic Park, like what happens with Jurassic Park, and that's what would basically happen to us, because we are essentially weak. Like when you go from an evolutionary standpoint, we are not we're basically feeble beings, but the superpower that we've basically um like essentially broke the meta, as as if you was is basically based on two things: tool use, or the the level of sophistication, of level of thinking, consciousness, and all that stuff. And then the second one is cooperation. And those two things have allowed us to essentially, quote unquote, break the meta of us being prey to an apex predator.
Yeah.
And it's not it's not a straight arch of it. It just basically went
Right.
sideways and stuff like that. But yeah, but
Yep.
but
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like me and Sophia were talking about that. Like, there are some theories that Neanderthals, they kind of died out because they couldn't really cooperate like the Homo sapiens could. We sort of cooperated, we teamed up, even though we were very, like you said, some of the weaker creatures out of the two. Like the Neanderthals were very strong, vicious. They were just all about war. They were warlike animals, and we, on the other hand, were more skinny. We didn't have so much hair on our bodies. We came from sub-Saharan Africa, where it was very cooperative and sort of communal. And we come, traveling out into the cold weather or whatever, and we meet these monsters, and these things could just destroy us, at the whim. They were killing the Denovians, and the other human-like species out of existence, and we were the only thing standing in their way. They were like going to be the apex predator, and they were going to destroy us. But yet we somehow were able to defeat them through our.
They would eat the shit out of us. Wherever they went, we fucking died out. We weren't standing in their way. They fucking.
Exactly, man. And so, yeah, that cooperation. So it's almost like nature rewarded that. Nature rewarded that cooperation. And so all
But
of
what did
these
they
things,
do?
sort of
But
these
let
values.
Scott, let's focus on
Mhm.
this one point though. Like, I'm
Yes,
sorry, you're skipping over the most important thing.
go
What did
ahead.
they do? They forced humans into into an evolution. It forced humans to evolve and stick together and be cooperative in order to survive this predator. So there's always that good side to things, even though it seems fucked up.
Yeah, yeah. And that evolution of purpose, meaning, morality, it comes from nature. It's grounded in nature, you know. Um, and even the idea of free will, you know, we have this feeling that we have free will. I kind of believe that we really don't have ultimate free will, but that we
Oh,
are
I
just
wouldn't get too much into free will yet, Scott. Let's hold off on
yeah.
free
Let's
will.
we're
We don't
gonna
want to
save
tease that
that.
out
Yep,
too much. Yeah,
I
yeah.
I have my own
Let's not
thoughts,
water
but
that down.
okay,
yep,
No,
I have
let's
my own thoughts.
let's hold off on free will. We've got it. Yeah, we've got shows
sure,
coming up on free will. We don't want to water it down now. No,
yeah.
but as far as evolution goes, I'm actually Mark Reed, who's a brilliant debater and who does talk about evolution and stuff like that. In fact, speaking of Mark Reed, I don't know. I'm gonna be really. I'm not gonna really get too much into the morality as far as my own views. Obviously, you guys all know I believe in objective morality, and I've got a really strong argument for it. But Mark Reed has reached out and challenged me to a debate on morality and my views on objective morality. So I do not want to give out too much of my argument because I've really refined it in preparation for this debate. And I've got it down to where I feel like I'm going to be able to go toe to toe with Mark Reed. And for anybody who doesn't know, Mark Reed is a very strong debater. He's debated Andrew Wilson, Jim Bob, Kent Hovind. He's debated a lot of big names out there in Christian apologetics. But I do think that I've got such a good argument for objective morality, but I don't want to give it away in case Mark Reed is looking around because he's going to do his research. He's very good at debate. He's going to do his research. And I changed my argument. I have the same premises in a lot of ways, but I flipped my argument from my last debate that I had against my atheist friend Tom on objective
Mhm,
morality because I don't want to have Mark be able to be prepared for me. You know what I mean? So he's going to have to do
mhm,
his work just like I'm doing my work because I know he could, come with a lot of different philosophy, and so I've got to. And that actually does. If I could just sidetrack for 1 second while we're on this, is because I had a major epiphany in doing my research in philosophy about morality, getting prepared for this debate, and some things occurred to me that were very powerful. One of the things that I decided to go ahead and do is I've had a lot of people who have been asking me if I do my own channel, and I had to tell them, no, I don't have time. And then I started collabing with Scott and Sophia. So I've been telling people, well, you can come find me over here. But it's not, I've got some people that aren't really as much interested in the content that we're making because they're not into the whole dualism, non-dualism thing, which is perfectly fine. Everyone's got their own flavor. And there's other topics that I'd like to get into that we just don't discuss because they're really not relative to again the dualism, non-dualism thing. So I thought, you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna go ahead and start my own channel. I'm gonna go ahead and do it because I've got so many things that I want to talk about. So for anybody who's here, I am starting my own channel. I've even got my first video up yet. In fact, it's only been up for a couple of days. It's got almost 1,200 views already. I can't believe it. And I picked up like 30 subscribers in just a couple of days. So I haven't even really done anything yet. My first video is going to come out next week. Yeah, it fucking blew up. I can't believe how I couldn't believe it
wow,
when I looked this morning. I was like, I told my wife, like 1,100, almost 1,200 views in less than 48 hours is insane.
that's
So yeah,
crazy.
people are pretty excited about it. So yeah, please do spread the word that I'm actually doing my own channel. If you guys will subscribe, and like I said, spread the word. I really appreciate it.
Of
I
course.
feel I was kind of bummed because I've had so many people ask me if I was doing my own channel, and over the last 6 months, and I've of course said no, I'm not doing anything. And I was thinking to myself, man, that's probably a couple hundred subscribers or more that I could have had, that I won't that I said no, I'm not doing anything, and now I've decided to do it. I lost that opportunity. And then when I looked this morning and saw how fast the thing is growing already, and I haven't even put the word out yet, that's just people who randomly came across it or word of mouth kind of stuff. So once I start getting out there on all my friends' channels and putting the word out in the community, I think it'll grow pretty fast. But so I'm pretty excited about that. But as far as the Mark Reed thing goes, and that whole debate about morality, that's going to be a big opportunity also. We're supposed to do that on the Raging Tomato, which is a big debate website. They have a lot of members. I'll be able to plug my channel there. I'm obviously going to plug the Trifecta show that we do here. Going to give that a plug as well, get people coming here, because I'm really excited about what we've got going on.
Mm-hmm.
And for Mark Reed, he put it when he was talking to a Christian here recently about evolution. The way that he worded it is that he said, imagine it's like a game, like a role-playing game or whatever you call it, or a Dungeons and Dragons or something. He says that human beings, that Homo sapiens, we put all of our points into the brain, into intelligence, and that's our superpower, right? And that's that's why we're able to be the apex predator, is because we put all of our evolution points, so to speak, into intelligence. And it literally has shot us to the top of the food chain, right? And it's cooperation, our understanding of cooperation, our ability to identify objective morality. Kantian philosophy, Kantian moral system talks about the categorical imperative, right? So when you start to really step back from typical Humean philosophy and this subjective moral idea, and the fact that this dualism idea where it's us against the world, when you step out of that paradigm and just kind of look more broadly with more of an open mind, you start to identify that there are natural laws that do guide not just evolution and not just physics, but transcendental things. So like the color of the redness of red, right? It's things of this nature. What does it feel? The warmth, what does it feel like to sit by a warm fire? There's so much more that's going on there than just the physical chemical reaction of our body warming up, right? There's this transcendental concept that comes into consciousness. And it's really a fascinating thing to consider. And it's really fundamental. It's a fundamental part of existence. It's the qualia of existence, right? The qualia versus the phenomenon. And this objective morality is a natural law. Morality is a natural law, therefore it makes it objective. It does guide evolutionary it doesn't guide evolution, it works with evolution. So just because dinosaurs didn't have the same type of ethics and morality that we would identify with doesn't mean there isn't a certain moral code. You know what I mean? The law of the jungle has its own sense of moral code. It's the natural law. Human beings, we have a much more highly evolved intelligence system. So we are able to identify the laws of physics, the natural law of morality and ethics, and all these different, things that exist that kind of the framework, the conscious framework that the intelligent being gets to work within, and we can identify these things more and more, and we're just scratching the surface right now.
Oh yeah, what's really interesting, and I was talking to Sophie about this earlier, is it's really a historical thing you can really trace back in really recent history. For such a long time, most people, whether you call yourself a philosopher or a natural philosopher or scientist, back in the day, hundreds of years ago, always gave experience the primary thing. But as we started to progress in our science, we wanted to, what the scientists would call, address the structural invariance of experience. This was kind of coined by Michelle Bitbull, right? Long time ago. And basically this is to say that, for example, if someone goes in a room or somewhere and says, oh, it's warm in here, somebody else may say it's a little cold, it's a little mild, somewhere in between. They wanted to have a sharper way to measure that, rather than just go off the subjective experience and reports of people. And so we have instruments like thermometers that can do just that. So instead of relying on that subjective antidote, that something is cold or mild or hot, etc., we can now quantify the temperature with a number like a degree Celsius, for example. And we have gotten so reliant on our instruments because we think that the measurements are so accurate. And we've gotten so used to that way, that method, that we think that the measurements are the things being measured. We're starting to really, it's a recent phenomenon in history, relatively speaking, that we now mistake the map for the territory. You know, we sort of go, it's like going on a mountain somewhere with your map and then thinking that, you know, the mountain somehow emerges out of the map, that, you know, we have to rely on the map more than the experience of being on the mountain. That experience of being on the mountain emerges from the map. And that's really kind of silly, you know. You can't really, that's kind of ass backwards, you know. And you're, while you're standing on the mountain, you're actually thinking that the mountain emerges from the map, so to speak. So that's kind of where this whole paradigm is now starting to shift over. And we see that so much with, you know, philosophers of mind, scientists, you know, this whole study of consciousness. They've actually coined the hard problem of consciousness, that, you know, it's like I was speaking of last weekend. It's kind of like the same way that the hard problem sort of describes it is like you're looking at the screen of perception in a movie theater. On the screen, you're perceiving the movie. And in the movie, you have this thing that's called the brain that is described within the movie as producing the experience of the movie. And so people start to think that, oh, this explains the experience, you know, on this screen of perception, on this movie screen. The brain, which is inside the movie, explains the movie, how the movie's possible, which is just asinine if you think of it that way. But it's actually the way a lot of science has been conducted, or the metaphysics behind science has been confused over the years. And so it's just kind of weird how we're finally kind of going back in time to, we're going back to understanding that, you know, what's primary is the experience of it all. You know, we have to give experience, you know, some kind of primary status there. You know, science simply is an exploration of experiences. That's all it really is. It's looking at the experiences of the world. You can make predictions, you know, you can measure it, observation, all of this stuff is observational, but it all starts with experience. It says nothing about the metaphysics, but so many people are materialists or physicalists over the years because of that. They're saying, well, you know, our instruments and all of these things, these descriptions have gotten us so far for creating cell phones and computers and this and that, that this must be the correct ontology, that materialism must be the right metaphysic. And actually, if you take that on board, it runs into a whole lot of paradoxes and problems.
Although, Scott, I kind of have to put the distinction between social sciences and STEM sciences, basically, or hard sciences, whatever you want to call it, is that essentially the social sciences is basically understanding the human condition, while while essentially hard sciences or STEM is essentially a language, or languages, if you want to be technical, about that describes natural phenomena. So
Right.
that's
what I'm saying. Exactly. You got it right. It's an exploration into phenomena rather than noumena. You know, noumena is the unseen
Even
ontology.
so, even so, though, whether we're talking about social science or we're talking about the hard science of objective reality, um, at the same time, we all know there are things that we just cannot quantify, and we still know that these things exist. Correct?
I'm not gonna go that far, but I am willing to find out. Is that that's
Yeah,
usually my attitude. but I'm not saying that
This is actually,
stuff. Yeah.
Well, I
What do you
mean,
want to say?
yeah. Oh, fuck.
most of us believe in things
God
like
damn it.
love and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I want to actually push.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but I want to push back a little bit on this. Is one of the things I actually wanted to talk to Scott and Sophia about. Kind of challenge you guys a little bit on the verbiage. Not to say that I completely disagree with what you're saying entirely, but the way it was framed. You guys had a very interesting conversation, mostly with Joel last week, and I was there, but I stayed out of it because it was with all the connection issues. It was turning into a shit show, and that like all four of us were trying to talk at the same time. And then we all realized that everybody was talking at the same time, so we all stopped talking. And then everyone realized nobody was talking, so we all started again at the same time. And it was kind of funny if you go back and watch that. It's like almost a comedy, like we planned it or something. But I realized that it was getting dysfunctional, so I kind of stayed out of it. But I did have some pushback I wanted to give, if you guys don't mind, because I'm not
Please.
I'm not trying to put you guys down
No,
or anything like
please.
that. But I would say so. Okay, so one of the things in my own personal, and this is for me personally, I'm not telling you guys how to live your life or how to whatever, right? This is literally only about how I approach life. Okay, so this is not me pointing the finger at anybody. But you guys were talking to Joel, and you said used some terminology. Um, you said that there's one thing that we know for certain, that we absolutely know for a fact, that we exist. That's the one thing that we know, right? There's no way we can't know that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, but I'm certain that was what was said, but I don't know if that's what you really meant. And then you asked Joel, like, well, Joel was saying, well, as certain as I can know anything, I know that I exist, right? And you guys were like, well, give it a number. What would you say? And Joel's like 99%. And you're like, well, what's stopping you from 100%, right? And
Mhm.
I would say that basically the answer, what can I know, is one of the fundamental questions in philosophy. What can I know? What ought I do? And what is the purpose of life? Those are three of the most fundamental questions in philosophy. The other two would be the hard problem of consciousness and hard solipsism. And as far as I'm concerned, that's really the core of what philosophy really tries to get at. Now, there's political philosophy and ethical philosophy and other things that stem from that, but they stem from those five basic questions, right? And two of those questions we have already determined are unsolvable. Hard solipsism is unsolvable, and the hard problem of consciousness is unsolvable. But the other three questions, what can I know? What ought I do? And what's the purpose of life? I believe there are answers to those questions personally. And what you guys are talking about, to me, is what can I know? And it seems to me that you guys are saying, oh, well, there's one thing that we can know for an absolute 100% certainty, an absolute fact that we exist, right? And am I understanding that correctly? That's your position?
Well, I
Yeah.
would like to add to that I did clarify that a little more, because me and Joel have had this discussion before. And basically what I'm saying is, let's just say, because he tried to propose something similar to what what's that guy name? Tyson something,
Oh,
the
Neil
black
deGrasse.
guy scientist.
Neil
Yeah.
deGrasse.
Uh and basically saying that, this experience could just be an illusion, right? And I'm like, sure it could, but even for an illusion, a mind is required. Like, it's still an experience. So what we're saying is, whether you objectively truly exist or not, what we can say for certain is that we're having an experience. I don't know if that puts it in a different light for you,
Yeah.
but that's basically what
No.
I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that's what okay. So that's what I understood. And Scott, you confirmed as well. That's what I understood you guys are saying. So for me personally, when it comes to what you guys are talking about, what I'm hearing you say is ultimately, what can I know? You're attempting to answer that fundamental question, what can I know? And you guys are saying we can know this. Well, there's actually
Yeah.
two different types of knowledge. Okay, in my opinion. There's what we would consider to be empirical knowledge, and we obtain this empirical knowledge through the scientific method. Things that we can test, things that we can measure, right? We do experiments on them, and this gives us our empirical knowledge. The other thing that we can
Right.
know is what we call practical certainty. Now, with practical certainty, this is where things like the illusion of free will, the illusion of time, this is what taps into this element of can know, right? We call it practical certainty because it's practical in that we function in life like this. Like dualism is a practical certainty for many people, right? Because they believe that if they are separate from the material world, then it's going to stop them from stepping out into the freeway and getting hit by a car because they see themselves as being separate from that car, right? So dualism can be a type of practical certainty. Your view on free will, whether you believe it's an illusion or not, this is a practical certainty type of knowledge, right? The difference between practical certainty and empirical knowledge is that the empirical knowledge has the evidence, the actual empirical evidence, which is why we call it empirical knowledge, right? So it can be tested and measured and verified by anybody who wants to run the experiment. The practical certainty is how every individual person functions in life, and not everybody is going to have the same practical certainty. It is a level of knowledge that goes beyond faith. Faith is a completely different type of knowledge, quote unquote. And I believe personally we should discard faith. I think that things like faith and belief are actually dangerous because these lead us to believe things that that can be very unhealthy for us. They can be unhealthy for our ability to cooperate with other people. They can lead us into nihilism, what we're talking about today, right? These faiths and beliefs. Those are not really useful. They can be because they help people overcome trauma, or they help people overcome drug and alcohol addictions, or they help people think there's a purpose in life, or whatever, all this other stuff. But we can do all of those things with using practical certainty or empirical knowledge. We don't need faith and belief to accomplish any of those things, right? So
Right.
when I hear you guys say we know this, what I'm hearing, the way I would put it is I would call existence for me personally, when somebody says, well, do you exist? Can you say you exist? I would say, well, with all practical certainty, yes, I exist. But what I would never do is say it has to be this way. It can't be any other way. And it's very similar to what Joel was saying. Joel was saying he wasn't calling it practical certainty. He's saying as much as I can be certain about anything, I'm certain I exist. But he was not willing to go that step to 100%. And neither am I, because we don't have a way to measure it. We don't have a way to test it. We have no idea what non-existence would feel like. There are philosophical theories that ultimate nothingness can actually collapse into something because there are no laws of physics that prevent it from doing so. It's paraconsistent type of logic, right? So even though it seems crazy to say that nothing can turn into something, there's a philosophical model that it's actually possible, because when you have nothing, you don't have any rules preventing nothing from becoming something, logically speaking. So, and again, I'm not saying you can get something from nothing. I'm just saying there's an argument, a logical argument that you can make for it. And because of this, I personally do not make any definitive claims about anything, because in empirical knowledge, even though we can test and experiment things, I'm a successful inventor, right? I've got patents, I've invented a new whole design. I can test it, I can measure it, I can prove it, quote unquote, that it actually functions, right? But even at that point, science always leaves room for improvement. As a scientist, as an engineer, that's what science does. We have a theory of evolution. We have the highest level of confidence that we can have in any theory right now is our theory of evolution, right? For how life changes over time, etc. But we still don't call that a fact. We still don't say it absolutely has to be that way. With practical certainty, I don't say anything has to be absolutely certain. I always leave that room for potentially learning something new. That doesn't mean that I go through life wondering if I'm here or not, or I go through life wondering if there's, whatever the thing I might be practically certain about. So we can function in life. We use our practical certainty to be able to function in life. We have to, that's why we call it practical, right? So the same thing with the illusion of time. We believe that time moves in a particular linear direction because it allows us to function. I set my alarm clock so I get up in the morning to be on the show. I schedule myself at work so I know when to be. All these different things work within this illusion of time, so it becomes a practical certainty that time only moves in a particular direction. But I can't really know for sure that I can never go back in time because of time dilation and all these other things that can factor into it. So does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, and I definitely uphold that virtue of always leaving room for doubt on just about anything. And so maybe a better way to approach it is to maybe work within your framework on that question, right? Like I could ask you, is it possible that contradictions could exist? Is there any small percentage that a contradiction can exist? A true contradiction?
Yeah, I would say yes, it has to. We have to allow that possibility. In my worldview, we have to allow the possibility for anything to be different. We don't know actually 100% about anything about reality. And it turns out that, as we've talked about before, there's actually a whole nother type of logic that they call quantum logic, because in quantum logic, you can get contradictions. In paraconsistent
Right,
logic, you can get contradictions. So
right.
there's all these
I'm
different,
saying
we have to
outside of,
reshape our fundamental understanding. Right.
so in the question that I'm asking, I know what you mean about paraconsistent logic and quantum logic. And what I mean to say is that just as a question, like a thought experiment or a hypothetical, let's say that there was this thing that was outside of quantum, like even quantum logic, there was no resolution, there was no paraconsistent logic that could resolve it. It was a quote unquote capital true contradiction. Do you think that a capital T true contradiction could exist?
Yeah, I would say with what I define as practical certainty, I would say no, because I don't go through life thinking that square circles are a thing, or my brain can't conceptualize certain things. However, because I understand, or what my understanding is that you can never be truly certain about anything, right? You
Right,
really can't actually be 100%
right.
certain,
And
quote
so,
unquote. We use the term certain, but let me ask you this. So if not, because I don't want to answer a question with a question, so I want to give you an answer, but I have a question to push back on. So when you say that I exist, and I know this is 100% certainty, I cannot be wrong about this, you're actually making several claims there without articulating them. One claim is that you know what the I means. You have an absolute certain understanding of what I even is, which then means you've solved hard solipsism. The other problem is you're claiming that you know exactly what existence means. And I don't think that anybody knows really identity problem. What are we, just brains in a vat? Are we people, or are we consciousness or not consciousness? I mean, there's so many questions that are unanswered that are entailed with I exist. It has so
mhm.
many questions that have to be answered before you can claim to know that you exist. And I don't think, with respect, I don't think anybody knows the answer to those two questions. That's why they're considered unanswerable and unsolvable. So if you think you have solved I, and if you think you've solved
Mhm.
exist, then you're way beyond the rest of the world, because no philosopher thinks we've solved either one of those problems. And in order to say with absolute certainty, with 100%, that I exist, that means you must know the answer to both those questions fundamentally. And I don't think
Well,
anybody
yeah.
does. So that's,
Well, there are philosophers who have, that they do have a solution for the I problem. And what they say is that, I don't know if you're, the ship of Theseus.
The
Um,
authority fallacy, isn't that like an appeal to authority fallacy? Because at the end of the day, what's problematic with your viewpoint is if you think that there is any percentage of doubt, you know, about your experience, or that you are aware, then everything that precedes that becomes meaningless.
yeah,
So
like
what are we
doubting is an
talking about here?
experience. So like so just to kind of cut short to it, what the philosophers would say is that the I is the experience, not necessarily an identity, but it is the phenomena experience itself. So if someone has any doubt, even 1%, that we don't experience, they must already be experiencing that doubt itself. So doubting is an
No, that's
experience.
actually no, that's no, I understand what you're saying, but you're actually conflating two different things here. You're conflating Descartes' I think, therefore I am, and his whole thought experiment with that was called the evil demon. And this is where this whole concept comes of even doubting gives rise to the fact that there's a sense of reality there. But that's not the I problem. That's completely separate. The I problem
Yeah, that's separate.
is actually the identity. Yeah, the I is the identity. And there's a whole slew of philosophers that have different approaches to what identity is. This is the whole transgender thing comes into play because
let me ask you something objective. Can I ask you a question?
well, let me just
that,
clarify something else too. Yeah, but let me clarify one other thing. It's not an appeal to authority fallacy that I'm making, because I'm not claiming any specific authority on, who's saying what, other than what I've just said about, Descartes and stuff like that. I'm saying that there is that consensus among all philosophers is that hard solipsism has not been solved. That's a
Correct.
fact. You can look that up. Who has a solution to hard solipsism? I guarantee you're not going to find an answer because it's unsolvable. So that's not an appeal to authority fallacy. An appeal to authority fallacy is just,
but my
okay,
question is,
just let me, for the audience, the
Hold
appeal
on
to,
one second.
yeah, just let me,
Go ahead.
the appeal to authority fallacy is when you quote an authority that's not actually an authority in the topic itself, or if
Right.
you quote an authority who hasn't actually done any work on the issue. So if I said that we should all be vegans because Michael Jackson says we shouldn't eat meat, that's an appeal to authority fallacy. Michael Jackson's not a dietitian. He doesn't know anything about nutrition.
Right.
He's the most famous
He's not an authority,
entertainer
right.
the world's ever seen. Yeah, he's not authority in
Right.
so that's the
right.
appeal to authority fallacy.
That's
Yeah.
what the right. But what I wanted to say though.
I would like to say something, damn it. I can't even get a fucking word in
Okay,
now.
go
I'm
ahead.
trying to ask a question.
Okay, go
My
ahead.
question is, first of all, my bad, but it sounded like you were saying, oh, we're trying to make a claim that no one else has ever been able to make. And I'm saying, first of all, I don't need to know exactly what I am to know that I have an experience. When you say I would have to know what I is, why do I have to know that? That's my question. Why do you have to know what I is?
Because the sum of the question, you say I exist, entails two components to it, two separate components. One component is I.
I'm having an experience. I'm aware, right?
I understand that. Right. No, well, as far as we know, we are, sure, but that you're saying I experience. So I is a one type of a claim. You have to then say with absolute certainty that you know what identity is. And I don't think that we do. Any one of us. I know I don't.
You know that it's your own subjective experience.
But that's not the answer to the question of I. That's not the identity. That's a whole separate question. That's what I'm saying is that
why does that need to?
Well, let me ask
because
subjective ethics a question.
Because if you don't know the answer to these two questions,
Hold on, Scott. Does a baby have an understanding of its own identity? No, it doesn't. A baby can be aware of light and not even know what light is or even know anything about its own identity, but it's still aware.
Okay. I mean, I don't know what a baby knows or doesn't know because we can't test that, but I would assume that you're probably right. Their baby has some type of level of consciousness at a very fundamental level, above the plants and above other animals to a certain degree, but maybe not even as highly evolved as an adult elephant might have a higher level of consciousness than a baby. Who knows? We can't test the baby's intelligence,
But that's not really the point, though. We do know that it has awareness based on its reactions, right? So since it has awareness, even though it doesn't know it's a baby, it has no idea about any of those things. That baby doesn't need to answer your question for us to know that that baby is aware.
Yeah, but the problem is that you've got two things. You've got the I, which is the identity that you're talking about, but you've also got the exist. and you're claiming to
But
know
let's
for
stick
a
with the
fact
identity
that
first.
that baby actually
Let's
exists,
stick.
independent. Okay, Sophia, but you're claiming to know for a fact that you know that you are you and that baby is outside of you. Even if you're a non-dualist and an idealist, you still are claiming that that baby is a separate image or whatever. And you're claiming to then say, well, I'm not a brain in a vat, or we're not all brains in a vat. You're claiming to have solved hard solipsism, whether you realize it or not. You're actually saying I've solved hard solipsism by saying I know for a fact that baby exists. Well, no, I don't think you do. I don't think I know I don't. I don't know if anything around me exists as it is. This could all literally just be patterns, wave functions in a brain, or a brain is what we use to kind of conceptualize solipsism, but it doesn't have to be
I
it's not
mean,
a physical
sure
brain,
it could
right?
be.
These could all just be.
That's not
Sure
the
it
hard
could.
problem with solipsism, though.
Sure it could. Sure it could be, but
That's
that's
not the,
not
that's
even what
not
I'm
the
saying exactly.
that's
Um,
not
go ahead.
just to be fair. Just to be fair, the hard problem with solipsism is the question of whether you are the only thing that exists, but it already presupposes an existence. So that's not really the hard problem with solipsism.
Well, no, but what is existence? That's what I'm trying to explain to you. That is what I'm
See,
talking about.
if
It's a
you
hard
look
problem.
at, if you
We're
address
saying
that
it's an
question, so
experience.
like if you look at William James, right? Like we go all the way back through all these philosophers like William James, David Hume, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Like for example, William James says the I is nothing more than a series of experiences. David Hume says I can never catch myself at any time without a perception. It can never observe anything but the perception. Everybody's
And Socrates has his own definition of what identity is. So just because you have some philosophers that have rooted it down to that point, I'm telling you, it's not a consensus in philosophy. Identity is not a consensus in philosophy.
But you were the one that brought that up. That's why I'm asking you what the appeal to
that's exactly
authority. See, if you appeal to real authorities, right? It can be valid. But if you're going to say that these appeals to authority don't mean anything, then we shouldn't even bring philosophers up in the first place, because there's always going to be those who disagree, are going to have different things. So the only way we can, so what I was going to ask you is, what would it take for you to know the difference between high certainty and absolute certainty? If it's not the philosophers, if it's not, is it just that I don't know? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think the premise is that there is no such thing as absolute certainty. It doesn't exist.
Do you know that absolutely
because
true?
we have
absolutely true. Is that absolutely true that you just said
that? Yeah, that would be the claim, right? And
so
that's the proof of
the contradiction.
How do you know that's
that
absolute certainty?
Right.
So it's absolutely true that there are absolutely no truths. That I'm not sure how
exactly. Yeah, it's paraconsistent, right? So it proves itself. It actually proves itself by being circular. In this one regard, it actually proves itself. So what's that? What's my awareness?
I'm trying to. Yeah, I said so. So is your awareness. Your awareness is it proves itself because you're aware.
Sure. I would approach it as just saying it's practical certainty that I exist. I agree with you 100% in that regard. That I think it's the most practical way to.
But when you say practical certainty, that's just a fancy way of saying that there's room for doubt. So let's be real with it. That's all it means.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So yeah, that's all it means. So we still talking about that you think there's room for doubt, that you may not actually be aware. And I'm asking you, why do you think that? And how do you know that for certain?
That's the point. I don't know that for certain. At the same point in time, I must know that for certain because I know that I can't. So this is the circular. This is where the paraconsistent logic comes into play here. So there's some things that we have to go we have to accept that we're in a cycle that we can't solve. So we really don't know. There's some things that we just can't. It's like going back beyond the Big Bang. We think there's something beyond the Big Bang, but we'll never actually figure it out because the laws of physics change, and we have no fundamental basis, no tangible basis, no empirical basis for testing or measuring any of that. So it's always, in my opinion, and this is how I function. So I just these claims of absolute certainty, because somebody could always say, well, how can you know for certain? And you could make claims and you could make an argument for something, right? Something that you feel absolutely certain about, but a hole can always be punched in that because you cannot step outside your own paradigm. You cannot step outside your own existence to actually measure it. Ultimately, that's where your guys' non-dualism comes into play, is you cannot step outside of consciousness, at least not yet. We don't think so. So how can we really measure these things? And because we know that there are some things that cannot be measured, we can't say for certain that there's not a different possibility. And like I said, there's actually a logical argument that could be made that you can get something from nothing. We think, practically speaking, our practical certainty says that's impossible, but you can make an argument for it that you actually can, that because there's no laws of physics that prevent it from happening, then technically speaking, you actually could get something from nothing. And it's like, whoa, what the hell? It blows your mind. But we cannot go through life thinking you're going to get something from nothing, because a school bus might pop out of thin air and crash onto my couch right now and kill me and my wife, right? I mean, if something could come from nothing, what's to stop that from happening?
Well,
So for practical certainty purposes,
I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you in principle, at least. I mean, I can conceive of what you're saying, but I don't believe what you're saying. And I understand what you mean is that it's a value. It's almost like you're putting forth a virtue of to be always open to the evidence that can persuade you. And I am, but it just seems to, I just haven't figured out a way to do that, even under paraconsistent logic, because I don't know how. And the reason why I say that is I don't know the difference. I don't even know in principle how I could know the difference between extremely high certainty to 99.99999 to a million dots behind it and absolute certainty. No one has ever shown me what the difference looks like. And if I can't determine what that is, then I have no reason to believe that. So I think what my hang up here is in belief. I don't believe, I have no reason to believe that I don't exist, because just having the doubt, even if it's just 1% of a percent, is the prerequisite to that is to exist. So I don't understand it. You know, it just doesn't ring true to me. So I don't believe it. But in principle, I see what you're saying. I can see that it's a virtue, but you know, virtues aren't necessarily true either. It could work the opposite way in your argument. You know, because if we're going to say that, then we can use it the other way. We can say that there's a possibility that we do exist for absolute certain under that same sort of paraconsistent logic. So it's really sort of confusing.
That's right.
The whole thing
Yeah,
about
that's right. And
the whole thing about the whole thing about paraconsistent logic, that's a system that we created, and the paraconsistent logic would it even exist without awareness? Like, come on, this is
It
crazy.
still presupposes, a conscious
like
mind
nothing
to conceive of.
nothing gets past awareness. Nothing, anything you say, nothing. It doesn't matter what you come up with. It would mean nothing without awareness.
But to be honest, we're speaking from true, genuine belief. I actually talked about this. And it's a very interesting conversation, by the way, because I had Joel on and we went one-on-one to really debate the whole topic. And I was telling him the reason why I'm saying my belief is it's a genuine belief. if I just grant you that what you're saying is absolutely true, then I would be dishonest to myself, because honestly, I haven't resolved the issue. Because again, like I told Joel, that same logic can be shifted in reverse, and it still leaves us moot. It still leaves the question out there. And so the only thing I have to work with is my belief and all of that. You know what I'm saying? And the belief is that I exist. And I would even say it's more than a belief or a faith that I exist, because I couldn't even have faith or have any sort of argument or anything one way or the other without first experiencing that existence. So for me, it's just hard for me to admit to things that I'm not really convinced about. But I do understand the argument, and I understand the virtue that you're putting forth, because I share it with just about everything, but I just haven't been able to solve this particular issue. That's all.
Well,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that it is a principle. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
well, for me, this conversation is way above my pay grade. Well, what it devolved into. However, like the people that I usually run with, well, he has basically different names. Mike, or usually Speed of Sound, or even has his own channel, Answers in Atheism. Basically, he's a secular Buddhist, and basically just like could probably give you a more satisfying answer than probably what we're like in the answer we're basically currently stuck in it.
That would
Stuck
be
in.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
But I also agree with what objective ethics says about the everything coming from nothing, because I actually agree with that in a sense. Because no thing, if you think about what is no thing, like potentiality is not a thing. And so nothing, the way we look at it, is not constrained. And if something's not constrained, then it's going to always collapse into every possible thing. But this sort of like informs my worldview at the same time of non-duality. Because if all things are the result of a nothing, then this is non-duality. This is sort of like idealism too, because everything that exists starts off as a thought of possibility. If you can use that metaphor, it's like a possible state of all states that could ever exist. And so we happen to live in the only one we can measure. And so we say that, mind emerged out of this, whatever it is, this non-constraint probability distribution. That's exactly how we describe idealism and non-duality and things like that. So we're actually speaking the same language. But I see the point that you're making is, it seems like it's so counterintuitive. Like, how could everything come from nothing? It just sounds ridiculous. But under this paraconsistent logic, it actually works. So I agree with you, on that level.
The fact that it is and you're right about the fact that it is a principle. It's literally all it is for me, is a principle. It's the way that I approach life. I'm not saying you guys are wrong whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm just saying for myself, I don't use that type of word as a principle that I guide myself with. Now, you can use the word virtue, because I study ethics and morality seriously, and I have debates about that stuff. Virtue is a very specific thing to me, and it's not just something that we just hold as a value, or that, you know what I mean? It actually is a very specific thing that's tied to the perfect medium, with like Aristotelian virtue would be the golden mean, right? That perfect place between having too much of something and too little of something. And so courage is a virtue, because it's that perfect medium between recklessness and fear, right? Justice is a virtue. It's that perfect medium between vengeance and unwarranted mercy. And so there's specific virtues, and I don't necessarily see this as being a quote unquote virtue, but that's just because how I use that terminology and my understanding of that. But you could certainly refer to it as a virtue. I could see where you're coming from, but I would agree 100% with calling it a principle. It is a principle for the way that I approach life. And I would never try to make an argument for non-existence, because for one thing, I see it as being kind of a waste of time. There's so many other things to meditate on that we actually could find answers to. I don't think that we could find an answer to that. I don't think that we could find an answer to a lot of some of these core questions about the hard problem consciousness, or or hard solipsism, for example. So for me, I don't even go down those paths because it's not really productive. I don't think that it helps us function, which is where I limit my claims to what I call practical certainty. And so for practical certainty, I agree with you guys 100%, Dave. Practical certainty, of course we exist, of course we're having experience. That only makes sense. It's the most logical thing to do. It's without that, without taking some practical certainties, life would literally devolve into nihilism. So we need practical certainties. Some people need faith, some people need beliefs. These things help keep them out of nihilism. And really, we're talking about nihilism today. And I think that practical certainty helps us stay out of nihilism, the dark side of nihilism. Because if somebody was to go around thinking, like Sophia was saying, if you're going to doubt your existence, you couldn't function in the world. And I agree with her 100%. If you're walking around doubting if you exist all the time, you would literally be dysfunctional.
Well, not 100%.
You couldn't do anything. You couldn't.
Not 100%. 99.999. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, whatever number you want to put to it, exactly. But at the same point in time, based on principle purpose, the way that I communicate things into people and ideas and stuff is as a personal principle, I don't think there's anything that I would claim there's absolute certainty for. There's practical certainty, but I wouldn't go as far as to say absolute.
Where I get this virtue language from, to be honest,
I'm absolutely sure that they exist, and I'm fine with that.
Oh, say that again. I didn't hear you.
But they will call me arrogant because I am 100% sure that I'm having an experience and that I exist, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I don't think he's calling you arrogant, but it's just.
No, I'm just saying because it is a play at saying that, I don't have any humility if I don't leave that room little percentage of doubt. I'm saying that's ridiculous. And there are some.
Yeah, that's not.
I'm saying
no, that's not anything that I've said. Joel was talking about intellectual humility. I did not use that verbiage, and I'm not saying you're arrogant. I'm not saying you don't have humility. That's not the wording I'm using.
Yeah,
I'm also not talking about how you guys should approach life. I'm talking about my own personal principles, how I go through life. You guys are free to.
It's a good conversation to have, and the reason that I think it is, even though like we could say it may at the face value, it does seem unproductive. But, there's long meditations on this in Buddhism. It's called the virtue of emptiness. And that's why I keep going back to this virtue. This is the virtue of emptiness. It's the practice of cultivating wisdom by understanding that all phenomena, even your existence, can lack inherent, independent, sufficient reasons. Like it's called the sunyata. And is seen as a virtue because it liberates one from suffering by dissolving the illusion of self and the soul and attachments, clinging, and everything that comes along with it, like emotions, fear, anger, so looking at reality more as a void of emptiness, it represents an interconnected reality that leads to more compassion, peacefulness, and stuff like that. So it actually becomes very productive and very meaningful. It actually ties into today's topic of finding meaning. It's just that I guess we're speaking from different frameworks. So I understand the virtue. And like I said, I understand that virtue. I'm not even against the virtue. What I'm just saying is under a logical sort of framework, the way we were speaking out of from them was like, I experience, therefore I exist, so it's one of those sort of things. But anyways, I don't want to berate it. We love to beat dead horses around here. So I don't want to we beat dead horses a lot, and let's not do that. But
just before we go,
Yep.
before I go, just thanking you all to just kind of, just kind of bringing me here in this conversation, and catch you later.
Man. All right, Chris. Thank you, man. Come on back anytime, brother.
All right, will do.
Hey, Chris, make sure you, Chris, check out my channel.
All right, cool.
Definitely. Yeah, I saw your video
All right,
of Objective Ethics. I saw that video too. The first one, you didn't have any volume though. It was kind of muted out.
Yeah, I did two. Yeah, I did 2 test videos because I was just trying to get it all figured out. And the first one didn't have any volume. And the second one, I just checked my volume. So the actual video that I've put out for people to view, it's a short. That's the one that's got like 1,200 views already. And it's on gun control. So pretty interesting little quip I made about that. So yeah, if you want to check that out. But my thoughts on gun control.
Oh, okay. I got to check that out. Nell, how's it going?
Oh, hey, I'm doing all right. I just got in onto the channel, so I'm not sure where we are.
Oh, okay. We were just talking about meaning and non-meaning and a lot of stuff.
Nihilism, and why
Nihilism.
theists accuse atheists and agnostics of being nihilists, when we've all, I think, concluded that that's the exact opposite for most of us. That we actually do have meaning in life, and we give life meaning through a variety of different ways. And we started touching on evolution, and I didn't really expand on that, but evolution shows us that there's an inherent meaning to life, because through the evolutionary process, we look at every species of living organism. What makes it a living organism, actually, one of the definitions is that it reproduces and then it absorbs and uses energy, right? And that will to survive, that innate, that core fundamental will to survive, is really what gives it life, purpose, and meaning. Is just life itself, right? Reproduction. So when we look at the strong, like the middle-aged strong people, they have the ability to gather food, to care for the young, and to care for the elderly. The elderly, they give us our direct access to history because they have experience. They've actually been there and done that. And the young represent the future. So when you put all this together, you get this cycle, this inherent cycle that life possesses. And so there's meaning in all of this that has nothing to do with gods or philosophy or anything. It's literally a fundamental part of physical reality.
And don't forget, now there's 1% chance that none of that happened.
Well, no, I mean, what Objective Ethics said, pretty much agree. It's like, going back to this meaning itself, it's like, I prescribe to.
You're really pro, like you do a lot of study in evolution. I know that's your pet interest. Do you find meaning, like you were just saying, I guess you do find meaning and
I think I don't agree with theists that it's objective, but I believe that the existential philosophy that you make your own meaning. Or I also know there's what's the other one? Absurdism.
Oh yeah. So when you say objective, you mean like from an authority rather than nature,
or just an outside source?
Yeah, like an outside source. Like that's an interesting question, because then we can talk about what do we mean by outside. Because like the way that, like me as a non-dualist, the way I would look at it is that we're all inside the same nature. It's just kind of an illusion that we're outside of nature trying to control it, but we're actually we're part of nature. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, no, I love that non-dualist take there. It's like, like meaning to me is like, it's a lot like how I view morality. It's, it's an illusion in a sense that it's not objectively true, but
Mhm.
it's subjectively true, and that's true enough for me. You know.
Mm. Objective ethics. What do you think about that?
I think can you rephrase that last statement, because you're breaking up a little bit, and I wanted to hear the subjective versus objective part.
I believe that how like I view morality, it's not, it's an illusion in the sense that it's not objectively true, but it's subjectively true, and to me that's good enough, a truth, you know.
So like morality, yeah, because a lot of it's really a tricky question for a lot of folks because in the immediate, it seems like our feelings are what drives us towards what we feel is a moral prerogative.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
and
feelings vary. There's invariance there because a lot
yeah,
of people feel differently about different things. And so a lot of people draw the conclusion that therefore morality and ethics
yeah.
are sort of subjective.
The one exception which objective ethics touched upon, I would say there is an exception to the rule when it comes to meaning or value, and that is like, because it's a biological truth that that organisms want to reproduce, and that we can't really escape that, yeah, as a species, at least on a whole. I know there's asexual people out there, but it's like, on the whole, our species wants to reproduce and carry on our genes, and I'd say that's pretty objective.
Hmm.
Now, when you said, I understood the morality claim, but the other thing I was curious about, did you say that, or maybe I misheard you. Were you saying that reality is subjective or objective, or is it both? Or how do you feel about that?
It's I would say it's I mean it has to be both. I mean, it all, if we're talking about all of reality, that encompasses our subjective experiences, and those, I wouldn't say those are not real. So I would just say that the difference between objective and subjective is, it's like, the objective truth in what I'm talking about is like a scientific fact, like the earth spins around, or orbits the sun. It's like, and value and ethics aren't true in that sense, but they are true in a sense that it's like, these are things that we feel, and we can bring them about and make them into a reality, the values and ethics that we want.
And are you taking the non-cognitivist view that morals don't actually exist? That's just feelings.
I mean, I would I'm not sure how I would word it, because I understand, like, I would say that there's no true or false statements, but I believe that there are morals. They're just
Okay. Yeah. So that's moral relativism. That, because I thought I heard you say that morals don't actually exist. We just make
Mhm.
them, which is two independent statements really. The non-existence of morals entirely is the non-cognitivist view. But if you're just saying we create morality, that's the moral relativist view, which is the
Well,
subjective view.
so to um, put a little nuance onto that, because I wouldn't say that I subject or prescribe to moral relativism, because even though I don't believe that you can actually get a true or false statement from the feeling itself, I do believe that we can agree upon standards, which then we can derive true and false statements from. Because I'm a humanist, and it's like, to me, if at the base of my ethics is the well-being of humans, there are wrong and right ways of going about doing that, and we can we can gain statistics and find out what's the best way to create human flourishing. Are you following?
So is that objective, or is it subjective that we figure out what the best way is, or is there actually an objective standard by
Well,
nature that nature establishes?
so I would say that at the base is subjective because it's just our feelings, and when, but a lot of our feelings are we feel the same way. It's like when most of us think murder is wrong, and so when our morals overlap like that, we can create moral frameworks, and so we can like derive objective statements out of that subjectiveness, if that makes sense.
I'm just confused because objective means stance independent, but everything you're talking about is stance dependent. So how did you get to objectively?
So what I'm saying is that
that
so the at the base is my subjective feelings, right? So I think
That's your
I,
stance.
I believe murder is wrong. But then let's say we get a bunch of people who agree that murder is wrong, and all right, so then how do we how do we justify murder is wrong? And then we can think, okay, well, what's something we can ground that in? And it's like, okay, well, there's the well-being of humans. It's like if we put the well-being of humans first, then I'm going to do well, you're going to do well, we're all going to do well if we try to put that as our standard. And then once we have a standard, we can get some sort of objectiveness from those standards, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. So I think just I'm steelmanning your position out of respect. So I'm going to try and repeat it back to you. And if I'm wrong, correct me. So you're saying that there's an objective standard of human well-being. That's nature determines what that is. So I can't subjectively say, oh, it would be human well-being. It'd be, to my well-being would be like, I'm going to drink motor oil for breakfast. That wouldn't work because nature, right? Nature has guidelines of what well-being actually is. It's not it's not stance dependent. Would you agree? Are we on the same page with that there's an objective standard that nature determines for human well-being?
What I'm saying is that once we can agree what our standard should be, which can be well-being, there can be objectiveness to it. Because like to me, it's like if we look throughout history, there's all these different competing moral frameworks, and it's like a lot of them don't put human well-being first. It's very tribal, and it's still very tribal today, but at least we seem to be getting progressively better. And to me that's a sign that morality at its core is subjective, because it's like it's this, over the course of human history, it's been evolving.
Do I understand the point? What I'm confused about, and what I keep coming back to is when the phrase human well-being, is that objective or subjective? That's the core of it, right? That's the very core of what you're talking. Is that objective or subjective?
That part is the objective part. That like if we can agree on that,
yeah,
then we can form objective statements about human well-being. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. That's what I was. Yeah. So there is actually there's a morality system, a moral system. I can't think of who developed this, but it basically talks about like they divide morality and ethics into two separate categories. So ethics becomes the objective standard. They call it like meta ethics, right? And then morality is just whether or not we decide to recognize any of those meta ethics. And morality is basically just what we label our behavior. So that's subjective. So you've got subjective morality working with meta ethics. But at the very core, the question becomes, is that actually objective or subjective? Because if ultimately your subjective stance is going to dilute down to an objective basic standard of what is objectively true outside of my stance. So drinking motor oil for breakfast is going to objectively hurt my well-being. That's an objective fact that nature determines. It's not stance dependent. And if that's the case, and your well-being is the fundamental principle for morality, then it's actually objective morality technically, because you're just taking a subjective view. the subjective, you're calling it subjective, but really it's coming down to an objective standard. So if morality is actually subjective, then it could be, my determination could be that it's actually good. It's morally good. It's to my well-being to feed my baby motor oil for breakfast because I've determined that that's my baby's well-being. That's completely subjective. If that's not the case, if doing that is highly immoral, because we know for a fact, because of nature, right, that that's going to kill my baby, then I absolutely cannot I can call it well-being if I want to, because I'm a free, I can speak whatever words want to come out of my mouth, but that's not attached to any kind of reality. The reality is that giving children motor oil for breakfast is going to harm them greatly. So there's an objective standard that ultimately guides all this, which ultimately would make morality based on objective standards. Just because we say something's okay doesn't mean that it's actually okay. It's an illusion that we make these rules, but it's not actually an objective fact, because the objective truth is that the rules are made by nature. It's the categorical imperative that Kant spoke about.
Well, I mean, everything is nature, but I mean, I get what you're saying, but what I can't really square with is, to me, is like the morality is, it's, to me, it stems from our feelings, and so if it's originating from our feelings, then I can't say that it's objective. I can only say that it becomes objective once we agree upon a standard such as human well-being.
But that actually would by definition be backwards, though, because everybody agreeing on something still makes it stance dependent. It's still subjective. Even if everybody in the world agrees on it, that in and of itself doesn't make it objective, because it's stance dependent. It's just dependent on every single human being's stance.
But if I say that, to me, if I'm admitting that morality is objective, then I'm admitting that my feelings are objective, and that doesn't seem right to me. Do you see where I'm having an issue?
No, yeah, I do understand that, and that's why it's actually an illusion and a misunderstanding. And this is what Kant spent so much time working on in the development of his philosophy with the categorical imperatives, because it's just like any other field of science, right? So for this vast majority that Homo sapiens have been on this planet the last 200,000-300,000 years, the vast majority, 99% of that time, all human beings agreed that the Earth was flat, right? But the Earth wasn't flat. Objectively speaking, the Earth's actually an oblique spheroid, and it's always been an oblique spheroid. But everybody agreed that it was flat. And so people can have an agreement. Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying as well, Kafai. We can all have an agreement about anything, right? But that doesn't make it objectively true. The objective truth is outside of our understanding. Now, the reason that I believe that morality is objective and not subjective, even though our moral understanding, our moral virtues, or however you want to put it, our morality, quote unquote, seems to evolve over time as we learn that, human flourishing is really important. Human well-being is really important. Autonomy, freedom and well-being, these things are actually important. So we start to say, slavery should be wrong, right? Murder should be wrong. But that's not because murder just became wrong because we decided it. Murder's always been wrong. Slavery's always been wrong because it's wrong by the categorical imperative. That's why morality, I believe, is objective. And I have a full argument for it that I'm not going to go into because I have a debate coming up against Mark Reed, and I don't want to give out too much for him to be able to study in coming up to our debate. But after that debate, which I think we're trying to get to happen around mid-January, but once I do that debate, then I'm not going to take on probably any more debates about it. It won't matter because my argument will be out there. But there's a full argument to be made to show, and I've already brought this up in other debates, subjective morality leads to logical contradictions. And we'll have practical certainty, right, in this experience that logical contradictions can't exist. So because logical contradictions can't exist, subjective morality must be false.
All right. Well, before I ask you to show me a logical or demonstrate a logical contradiction, I did want to just clarify that I'm not sure how I would fit into the moral relativist view, since I believe in both subjective and objectiveness. It's just because it's like, to me, a moral relativist would look at like a Muslim-run country and be like, well, that's their culture. They can do what they want. It's their society. And since I put the well-being of humans above everything else, I would be like, well, no, they can do better than that, and they should, change their ways and not, mutilate female genitalia and whatnot.
I can try to answer that from what I understand about moral relativity, and I think how folks may be trying to apply it here is that if it's moral relativism, there would be a conflict between individual beliefs and the need for like an impartial shared standard. So if morality is purely subjective, it would imply that no moral claim is universally superior to the other. And so, but if we take on the relative morality, we kind of say that that's true, right? But people don't like moral relativity because, of course, it leads to contradiction. So when people act as if certain moral principles, like don't steal, don't rape, whatever, are universally binding and dismissively react to those who violate them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
kind of shows while individuals have personal feelings about right and wrong, the concept of morality seems to imply an objective basis because everybody's appealing to it, likely. It's that's where they get up. That's where they apply it that way. I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but
no, I mean, for the longest time, I've seen no issue with how I viewed morality of at the bottom is subjective and then at the top is you can get objectiveness. But if I'm wrong in my thinking, I want to know that I'm wrong. So if objective would, get into some of the details here with the contradictions, I'd really like that.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to give out too much. I'm not trying to be like coy or disrespectful because I think we deserve to have really solid answers. But I do have a debate coming up, so I'm going to try and give out as little as possible. But to give you an example of the contradiction here, it's an internal contradiction, specifically what I'm talking about. So let's look at slavery or murder. This example can be applied to any moral question that you want, literally anything at all. But slavery is an easy one for people to wrap their head around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the slave master, he is a moral agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
He believes that his freedom and well-being has an inherent value. It's not even a belief that he has. It's an inherent understanding because he wants to take action, set goals, and take actions as an agent, right? So he can take people and make them slaves because he's very powerful. He's got an army, or he's got a big gun or bazooka or whatever the hell he's got. He can make slaves out of people, right? He can do that. But what he cannot do is say that it's morally justified to take away another human being's freedom and well-being and autonomy and agency, because he knows for a fact, whether he even is aware of it or not, his actions are showing that he values his own freedom, well-being, and autonomy. So he cannot take away something from somebody else and call that morally justified. Even though he can physically do it, he cannot, because that's a logical contradiction. You're literally saying it's okay to do something that I know it's not okay to do. Same thing with murder or stealing or anything else. This is where the categorical imperative comes into play, and how Kant came about this understanding is that even the mafia boss who wants to go and he's gonna do a job for the mafia, right? And he's gonna go do a mafia kill or whatever. On his way there, he's gonna say, boy, I really would not want to live in a world where everybody just went around killing everybody else. I definitely would not want to live in that kind of an existence. It's going to be okay for me to do it, but I don't want everybody else to do it. I don't want, you know what I mean? So it becomes this logical contradiction, which is where the universal principle that Kant talked about came about, is that our moral decisions must be based on something that we would want to be a universal law for everybody to abide by. And that's where the internal conflict comes into play with morality, is because we're really good at judging other people's behaviors and saying, boy, I wish person X wouldn't do that, or I wish person Y didn't do that. But I'm going to go ahead and give myself a free pass because I'm having a bad day, or because I believe in Jesus, or whatever the fuck their excuse is, right? They don't really hold themselves to the same standard that they hold everybody else to. And this is what Kant realized, is that actual morality must be a categorically imperative, that it must just be universal. These universal rights and wrongs must exist. And we must identify this internally, but we don't actually express or live our lives this way in many cases. Does that kind of make sense without me giving out too much?
Yeah, no, I followed along just fine. And thank you.
Well, yeah, when it comes to these things, you'd have to digest them. You know, it takes time to really think about it and digest it first. Because you got to understand too, one thing I realize about a lot of the things that we understand to be true, or that we believe, or what, however you want to say it, it comes from a lot of cultural teaching. Like, especially if you're like me and you've been around a lot of atheist groups, and you listen to a lot of atheist speakers like Matt Dillahunty and, you know, speakers like that, right?
Yeah.
It's always the same talking point that, oh, morality is subjective. The Christians got it wrong. And they have all these arguments. And, you know, you may resonate more with the atheists because they're atheists. And so you're going to automatically kind of take more stock into their arguments to begin with. And so when you hear things like objective ethics coming from anyone, objective morality, whatever, your naturally your knee-jerk reaction is to reject it offhand, right? But so it just takes a little time to, if you're introduced to these new concepts, just give it some time to think about, you know, because I know I went through a lot of this stuff talking about idealism and things like that. A lot of atheist people just didn't understand. It sounded too much like religion, you know, for some reason. And so it's hard to really sort of digest it. Free will is another one, you know, like you can make really clear arguments for why free will is kind of like a square circle. But a lot of Christians are just they're so indoctrinated to understand free will is the basis of judgment of God. You know, the fact that we have free will gives God precedence to punish us, because if we didn't, then God is punishing us for what? But then also you look at the justice system. Then if people don't have free will, then what is the basis for throwing and locking them up for life and or putting them to death or whatever? They can't help it.
Exactly.
They're just you know what I mean? And so it's hard for people to really just digest certain concepts. You have to really think about these things. They don't really take anchor that quick, you know.
I'm a very much an overthinker, so I got a lot of time. And no, I really appreciate it, because I'm not afraid to be wrong, and if I'm wrong here, then good, and it means I have another true belief I can, you know, latch on to. But I would like it, since objective ethics, since you can't go too much into it, are there any books or resources you could point me towards?
I would actually I would highly recommend doing two things. It's a two-step process. If people are really interested in understanding the core of the argument, is start with David Hume, because he's a little bit easier to digest, and look at his subjective stance, and then follow that up with Immanuel Kant. Kant spent 11 years trying to figure out how to overcome Hume's moral system. And Kant actually did it with the categorical imperative. But instead of just jumping right to Kant's solution, I would start with David Hume, so you can get a really good core argument for the subjective stance, and then watch how effectively Kant dismantles it, because it's really brilliant. It really is. And I agree with you 100%, Nell. I really respect that about you and about everybody, you know, here. Sophia, she dipped out, but I respect that about her too, is that we are looking, and the beauty of being a skeptic is that we are embracing the fact that we could be wrong about things. We want to be on the right side. You know, I had this discussion about morality and ethics with a Christian nationalist, Gothics, who ran with Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. And I was defending objective morality from the secular viewpoint, from the philosophical viewpoint, right? That you don't need God for morality. That's not even objective morality. And I explained to her that that's called divine command theory. It's not even objective at all. It's subjective to the stance of God, right? So Christians claim this objective morality, but they don't even know what they're talking about, because this is what what Scott was talking about. He's absolutely right. And I'm so glad that Scott brought this up, because this is something that I would love to discuss in my debate, but it's kind of a red herring. And I'm not going to commit any fallacies. I'm really going to focus on avoiding fallacies. So I'm going to avoid the red herring, but I really do want to get it out to the audience at some point so that the audience can consider this. My personal feeling about the subjective morality claim, because here's the thing. The significant majority of philosophers, modern day philosophers, are agnostics or atheists. Like 75% of philosophers are actually agnostics and atheists. And the majority of philosophers believe in objective morality. They take the moral realist view that I'm taking. But if you actually are out on the internet, like the three of us are all the time, right? I would say that our anecdotal experience is probably the same, that it seems like 90 to 95% of the uneducated, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, I'm just saying that just these people are not studied in philosophy, right? They're laymen. And so they're all subjective moralists. They're all moral relativists or non-cognitivists or some kind of variation of this. They believe in subjective morality. And I'm like, what is the disconnect between the educated atheist and the layman atheist? Why is it the educated ones, not all, but the majority believe in objective morality, and yet the uneducated atheist, and again, I'm not saying uneducated like these people are stupid, I'm just saying that in this particular field, they're not studying moral ethics and stuff. They're studying evolution and physics and stuff like that, right? Or history and stuff. Well, the difference, I believe, is exactly what Scott was talking about, because what we do know is that the significant majority of people that are atheists and agnostics used to be religious. They deconstructed from religion. And religion is a cult, and all cults can be extremely harmful. And there's a study in psychology that's called RTS. It's called religious trauma syndrome. And what that study has shown is that people who deconstruct from religion carry some type of emotional trauma. And it's easy to understand why, because their entire social groups, their families, their businesses, I mean, so much is tied to this religion. Now, I'm one of the outsiders because I've never been a religious person. I've always been an agnostic my whole life, so I don't have a deconversion story. But most everybody that I know has deconstructed from religion, and they have a very, very emotional, visceral, negative opinion about religion because of all this trauma. And I think what Scott was saying is very, very appropriate. I do believe that the majority of the uneducated, quote unquote, atheists, the laymen, when it comes to the moral philosophy, they are remembering that one of the many dogmas that religion was shoving down their throat was, oh, we have moral superiority over those damn atheists. You know, they don't have any morals because they don't have God. We have objective morality, but they have subjective morality, which means they can't say that slavery is just wrong. They have to give this, well, slavery is only wrong because we decided it's wrong or whatever. But technically, slavery could be right because it's subjective. And they run atheists over the coals with this subjective morality stuff. And so atheists, remembering all this, say, I'm not an objective moralist because I'm not a Christian. I don't believe God gives me my morals. I give myself my morals, just like I give myself value in life. I'm not a nihilist because I give life. I'm the one who gives life purpose and meaning. And I do believe it is a emotional knee-jerk reaction among most atheists to just claim subjective morality because they haven't actually studied the philosophy behind it. And their approach is coming from anything that reminds them of that cult that they freed themselves from. They want to distance themselves as much as possible from it. And I think Scott's absolutely right about that.
I completely understand, because I mean, both Scott and I deconstructed our faith, and I'm pretty sure both of us went through our angry atheist phase.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like
It's
dealing.
the same
Oh,
thing with physicalism, materialism, like the dualism stuff. It's like it took me a long time to try to figure this, to wrap my head around it. But what I really realized through a lot of introspection was that a lot of what was causing me a problem was I was equating it with my religious teachings. And I
mhm,
wanted to be so far removed from it because of the trauma that he was referring to. I
mhm.
definitely went through religious trauma like
Yes.
nobody could
Mhm.
believe. And
And uh,
so anything at all that could sound remotely like
mhm,
religion, I was just going to reject it. And
mhm,
it took me so long, because one of the things I also unfortunately learned about at the same time was sound epistemology. And
mhm.
I learned that I have to always check myself. Like, am I really just reacting off emotion, or do I have a reason for why I believe these things? And so I really had to check myself, and it all led me down the path I'm going. And so that what he's talking about is very real. That religious trauma syndrome is not a joke, man. It really distorts your view of reality.
Oh yeah, no. I'm trying to remember to like, and to tie this into the whole meaning discussion. It's like when I was first deconstructing, I did fall into that nihilist trap because, and a lot of atheists do fall into the nihilist trap because it's like they are still, even though they no longer believe in God, their the religious teachings are still there. It's like if your whole center of being of life is God, and then you just remove that, well, it's like no wonder you think everything is meaningless all of a sudden. And it's like it took me a little bit to finally come to realize, oh, I can make my own meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't I don't have to feel this existential dread every single day.
And I
And
also
that.
want to validate you, Nell. I want to validate you and your experiences by humbling myself in public here too, to admit that there's many things that I thought I knew something about, and being open to being wrong gave me the opportunity and the willingness to actually look into things and study what's the science behind this. And the transgender thing is one area where I was actually wrong. I always used pronouns out of respect. I saw it as a respect issue, but I had
Mhm.
never really studied any philosophy or neuroscience when it comes to actual identity. So it's good to use things to do things out of respect. If you got to start somewhere, it's always a great starting point, right? Right, to just to be respectful. But it turns
Mhm.
out that there's a huge science behind this that I was completely
Yes.
ignorant of.
Mhm.
And so now when I talk to people about the transgender thing, I can have a more firm, solid position on why I'm doing something and why I should encourage other people to do something beyond just, hey, let's play nice. Because playing
Mhm.
nice doesn't necessarily resonate with very many people, which is unfortunate because you'd think that should be the fundamental place to start, right? Is just fucking respect. But
Yes.
unfortunately, people, it's that what we're talking about with the
Mm.
morality thing is that everybody wants to judge everybody outside of themselves, but they don't want to hold themselves to that same standard. So they want to be respected, they want to be
Mhm.
valued. They want their ideas to be respected and recognized, but they don't necessarily extend that to other people. So a fundamental place to start, unfortunately, isn't most effective to say, well, let's just start with respect. So having a more fundamental knowledge of the science, the neuroscience behind identity, and also looking into philosophy of identity has been a wonderful journey for me to take, but it's been humbling because it's like, holy fuck, I actually thought that this was just about an issue of being polite. I didn't understand what identity even was. And so it's, being wrong about something, the best part about being wrong about something, if you're open, is that when you actually discover the truth, then it's such a wonderful feeling of fulfillment and
Mhm.
accomplishment and knowing that now you're lining up with reality. I think that science deniers, when they people deny evolution, it just breaks my heart because the evolutionary processes are so fucking incredible. It
Oh
is
yeah.
so amazing to actually think that that all the inorganic, I look when Christians, theists in general say, you can't get life from non-life. It's like, dude, do you realize that we are all made up, chemically
Yeah.
speaking, of non-life? There's not a
Subatomic
single
particles.
organic element on the periodic there's not a single organic element on the periodic table. And yet we're made up of all of these elements: calcium, right? Hydrogen, potassium. All these things actually make us, carbon. This is all the different elements that come together that make us who we are, that make life, is inorganic. And the whole fucking thing is so beautiful.
Oh yeah.
It's so
No.
amazing. And there's so much to it that's just,
It's
but they deny themselves this because
and
the God has to be the,
yeah, and to me that's like that's one of the keys into like coming to your journey into like the science behind trans people. It's like once you take on this cosmic perspective, it's like after studying evolution and cosmology, and it's like you realize like, oh, we're all made of the same stuff. It's like when you take on this cosmic perspective, it's like if everyone just had a cosmic perspective, the world would be a much better place, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I find too, having this cosmic perspective. And you see so much more beauty in life. For me, it's so much more meaningful than religion. Religion, this divine authority stuff, is like being ordered to love God, and you have to be ordered to, it's something fake about that, very disingenuous. And I'm not saying this is the case for everybody that calls themselves a theist, of course. I'm not saying that at all. Some people find a lot of meaning in their religious practice, and I wouldn't take that away from them. But I'm just saying, there's other ways to achieve the same thing, if not even more deeply.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, every time, or almost every time, I think of, when it's like the universe is inside me, it's inside you. We are the universe. Becoming aware of itself, and
Yes.
it's just it always hits hard. Yeah.
Dude, wait till we have this show next weekend. We're going to talk about the A theory and B theory of time and compare the two. And we're going to tie all this stuff in together. And it's going to be a really fascinating conversation, because I actually wrote an article about that last week. And I got so much good response from scientific-minded people and everybody. So everybody could get with it. It was really, really fascinating. And just doing the research when I was putting the article together just reinforced my view of just how beautiful reality really is and how mystical it really seems to be, actually. Even from a scientific language viewpoint, I was just trying to use strictly scientific language on this and just kind of maybe show how some of the, spiritual traditions sort of intersected with it. But just even the scientific language it makes it sound so poetic and beautiful, man. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I've been really, really grateful that I met you and Sophia, and you guys got me thinking about a more empirical way to look at the non-dualism. Because as I mentioned to you guys before, I don't consider myself to be a non-dualist at this point. I think there's still a lot of questions that I have, but I think there's some really great information out there. And I've actually been doing quite a bit of study from different people. I've heard you guys mention some different people I've found throughout my own studies about this. And I think that for me, when the practical certainty I was talking about before, the dualism gives us the illusion, at least, of dualism, allows us to function in the world that we're in. So there's some value to that. But at the core of it, what is really true is very interesting, because the way that I get through life, and I have been very successful in my personal relationships compared to most people that I know, it's just interacting with people, in particular with strangers. I've been financially very successful, frankly, because of that. And I have a lot of people who view me as being this kind of this sage or something. I don't know how to put it, how they would define it, but I get a lot of people who are just, they stop what they're doing and they tell me a lot of times, wow, you have so much great energy. You just really made my day. I really appreciate, and my whole philosophy on life is been, I treat everyone as a brother or sister. I call people brother, sister all the time. I call them family. I do believe that there's this great way to approach life as if we're all connected, because
Mhm.
that helps me. That philosophy really encourages me to respect other people genuinely if I believe that they're connected to me somehow. Now, whether I actually think that's empirically true or not is the journey that I'm on right now. And Scott and Sophia have been a great asset to that journey. But even if I decide that maybe there's not an empirical reason to say, yeah, non-dualism, everything's connected with consciousness is fundamental. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But my practical certainty, the way that I live my life, ethically, morally, socially, is to act as if we are all connected. We are all coming from the same source. We ultimately have the same goal. And that belief system that I go around with every day has allowed me to a great deal of success in my relationships. Obviously, not everybody. There's going to be people who don't like me or who think I'm an idiot or think I'm some kind of a whatever, and that's perfectly fine. They have a right to their opinion, and I'm not out here to please everybody or necessarily anybody individually. It's got to be as a collective. I want to please humanity, and I want to contribute the most to the human condition that I can, and that's
Mhm.
all I have control over. I can't control other people.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I don't care what Scott says. I think you have a beautiful soul, Objectivist.
He does. He's a wonderful guy, and we kicked it off, immediately when we met, through Lou's channel, and and the beauty of it is just being able to resonate, even if you don't really understand each other's view for whatever reasons. That's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. We can argue, we can disagree passionately on semantics and things and whatever. It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, can we really see the humanness in each other? Can we empathize? Can we sympathize with each other's points of view and make progress in life together on a journey? Because let's face it, if we all got in a room and we all agreed with each other on just about everything, somebody's got to be lying. Somebody's got to be dishonest there. Because the reality is we all have our own point of view in this reality. We're all sort of localized, and we're disassociated from each other in so many different ways. But if we can just find those core things that we can agree with, and mainly the important core things, like he was just talking about, empathy, respect, being kind to one another, being more positive, then those other little trivial disagreements really don't matter. And who really knows and who really cares? It's like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have an enjoyable experience together and we share something special. This is why this is the part about dualism I don't like, is the fact that people take themselves too serious. Like, people take all these things so serious, like differences of political opinion or religious opinion or philosophical opinion. These things are taken, so they get angry about these things. They get violent about these things.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, why? It's because you're so attached into bullshit. It is really what it comes to.
Mhm.
I don't know. I just don't. That's why I wanted to make a channel where people can all come together and have, differences of opinions on different aspects, but we can talk about it. We can passionately talk about it. We can make the best arguments for our point of view, but then come back and be friends and come back and love each other just like we did before we had the conversation, because it's just conversation.
No,
It's
yeah.
just words.
And this channel that you've made, Scott, it makes me feel safe. So I'm sorry you had that falling out with that other trans woman, but
Yeah.
I feel you make me feel welcome. So
I tried to, and it was so unfortunate because I loved Katie, man. She was a great person. She was smart. And she still is. I'm not saying she lost anything, but it's just so unfortunate because I opened up the platform and had people on that had different views about freedom of speech and how it relates to transgenderism and, making women feel safe in public spaces. And we talked about possible solutions. And it was just, she was just very dogmatic about her viewpoint. And I'm like, no one's trying to take away your viewpoint. You have every right to your view. In fact, you should have came on the show and expressed your view. And she was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to ever talk to you again. You're a bigot." And the fact that you would host bigots, I'm like, that's a little unfair. Like no one's a bigot just because they have disagreements with you. No one said transgender people were evil or bad. No one was saying that. No one really said that.
Because, I mean, I get it. There are some outlier thorny issues like what to do with sports, and obviously the solution isn't the MAGA solution of just banning transgender people from sports altogether. But it's like there has to be a discussion of some sort.
Why not? What's wrong with discussion? It doesn't mean I'm for or against anything. It's just a discussion. We're trying to figure it out together. Like
the thing I won't discuss though is like if you're going to try to debate my existence, then we're done.
Right. Right. That's why I had to kick what's his name from the show. The racist guy.
Yes,
like,
and that's and I really appreciate it. It's like you have a no nonsense approach to that.
Yeah, it's like I can tolerate anybody's disagreement. I don't really care. I like it. And it helps me to learn. It helps me to maybe forge a different attitude towards things. But there's no need to, dehumanize another person. Like, it's just ridiculous calling Sophia a monkey and shit. Like, why? Yeah. And then talking about Jewish people or this and that. It's like, good God. Like,
yeah.
Like, I know you have a viewpoint on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but that doesn't mean that one side are animals and the others aren't. Like, we're all human beings. Let's be real,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible conflict.
This is one of the interesting things. I don't know. Yeah, Nell, I don't know if you were here when I was making the announcement earlier. I don't know if Joel was here, but I actually I decided to take starting my own channel seriously. So I started putting up content. So I'd like it if you guys checked it out, maybe subscribe if you're into it. But this is one of the things that I will be discussing on my channel is, as an independent centrist, I look at politics and I'm very disappointed, and particularly in Western politics in America, specifically where I live. This bipartisan system is really broken because what I see is it's extremely divisive. I see the same thing with religion. It's extremely divisive. And you have people on the far left, or it's not even the far left, it's people on the left, people on the right. They are not willing to have the discussions. They're not willing to accept that many things are nuanced, like abortion or whatever, transgender in sports, so these different types of things. There's so many nuances to these issues. And the problem that I see is that people, like I was talking about earlier with the self versus how we expect other people to behave, the people on the left, they want the people on the right to compromise and to give things up. But nobody on the left wants to give anything up. And the people on the right are doing the same thing. They want the people on the left to compromise and to give things up, but they're not willing to give up anything. Religious people want the not religious people to give everything up, and they don't want to make any compromises. And the atheists and agnostics like myself, we want to just get rid of religion. And you know what I mean? Like, there's just literally no compromises. And how can any human being expect that if I have a disagreement with Scott, and I expect Scott to do all the giving in that relationship, that's completely unrealistic. It makes
Yeah.
no sense
No.
if you think about it logically or practically. I need to be able to extend the olive branch to Scott. And oftentimes I should be the initiator. I should go, Scott, let me take the first step forward towards your position and set the example of what compromise is all about.
Yeah.
And then Scott can identify that and say, oh, this guy sincerely wants to work something out. You know what I mean? But people just in group settings in particular don't want to do that. And so
Yeah.
this is the kind of stuff that I want to be addressing on my channel. I want to discuss
Oh,
philosophy, religion. I want to discuss fitness is something that I'm really into. I do a lot
Yeah.
of working out, build my body, and my body's my temple. So I want to help people who are into that kind of thing. And I want to talk about mental health issues. And
Oh.
I really want to avoid politics because of the divisiveness, but I want to talk about the mental health of learning to build relationships with people we disagree with.
Well, I mean, I'm a leftist, but I'm trying not to be dogmatic about my beliefs. So if you ever want to, talk about, that sort of thing, I'm more than willing to. I'm very much, I'd say, a pragmatic leftist. It's like I don't see the point of all the infighting that leftists do and like the virtue signaling. I'm not about that. So. If you ever want to
Yeah,
talk.
it's a big problem. I think it tends to flare up in the group settings. I think as individuals, people are a lot more reasonable, but unfortunately we get this group ignorance, this collective ignorance in our echo chambers, and suddenly, like you just said, it becomes a virtue signaling. Instead of just having a virtue and being virtuous, we're using it, our virtue, as a weapon against other people. We're using it to judge other people and do these different things, which is why I try to be really careful about, I have a particular standard, a principle, as Scott said earlier. He's exactly right. It's my own principle for how I live, but I do not expect Scott or Sophia or anybody else to adopt my principles. That's they can do whatever the fuck they want with their lives. You know what I mean? All I can do is lead by example, which is keeping myself in check. That's where it starts and stops with me. Now, I am, as much as I hate violence and stuff, if somebody was to try to do something to my wife, or if I saw somebody try to do something to a little child or to a handicapped person, I would fucking lose my shit. And I have before. In fact, the last fist fight that I got into was somebody fucking mouthed off to my wife. And I'm not proud of that necessarily. I'm not ashamed of it either, though. There's a certain standard that, like, hey, so I'm not a perfect person. I will go over the line to defend certain things that I feel are worth defending. I did a short on gun control. I think you guys should check it out. I'd love it if you checked it out and gave it a thumbs up. But basically, the premise of it is, people have asked me, because of my views about nonviolence and because my father was murdered when I was a kid, he was shot. Would I ban all guns? If I could just snap my finger, would I get rid of all the guns in the world? And my answer, surprisingly, is no, I wouldn't. Because the bad guys have guns, right? And for one thing, so you can't take away guns from good people and start to legislate like that. That's dysfunctional, because the bad guys aren't going to follow the rules. So if I could just snap my finger and make all the guns go away, why wouldn't I do that? Well, the reason is because the guns aren't the problem. The problem is the violence. People were killing each other by the thousands using swords and spears. And before that, they were using rocks and sticks, right? So guns aren't going to stop people from doing terrible things to other people. What we need to do, if I could snap my fingers, is get rid of violence. Then the need for guns would disappear. The guns would disappear because there's no need for them. The problem would take care of itself, right?
Yeah.
So instead of becoming a hydra where you chop off one head and you've got 8 more growing back, you've just take out the whole thing at one time.
No,
I didn't read all that.
get-
It says something about human. I guess I can look at it.
Yeah, I'm fielding a question from Cafe to Objective Ethics. Curious to how Objective Ethics avoids Hume's guillotine. Sure, feeding a baby motor oil would consequent in death, but where do you get the "you ought to avoid causing death"? Is that smuggled in? So I guess this has to do with your objective morality.
Right. Yeah. No, I actually have a solution to Hume's guillotine, and I don't want to give it up because of the debate, because I guarantee my opponent is going to bring up the guillotine. So because that's the one of the primary objection that philosophers have tried to bring up tried to raise about the objective moral position, the objective realist position. But Hume's guillotine is not a problem once you understand how the argument is structured. It's something that a lot of people throw out there. It's a kind of, and I'm not throwing shade on Cafe or whoever said that comment, but it gets used, it gets misappropriated all the time. David Hume, when he came up with the is-ought problem, it was specifically because he was looking at ways to attack Christian morality and the Christians' claim to objective morality. And so this is where he came up with his objective, his moral relativist view is specifically to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're trying to set it up. We don't have a hard date yet, but it's going to be against Mark Reed, who's a very good debater. He was an atheist, a friend of mine. He reached out to challenge me on my views after seeing my last debate on this. And we're trying to get it done on Raging Tomato, which is a big debate website. And she went ahead and approved it. She said she gave me a kind of a hard time because I'm a nobody and they're a big site. So when I reached out to her, she's like, "Who the fuck are you? I know Mark Reed. He's been on my channel before doing debates, but who the fuck are you?" You know, and so I had to send her links to previous debates that I'd done, and I had to agree to a bunch of things, you know, like to meet her standard or whatever. So she says, "Okay, yeah." She says, I looked at your stuff. You sound like you know what you're talking about. And so I'll go ahead and reach out to Mark and we'll set something up. So it's going to be hopefully mid-January. I didn't want to do it before the holidays because I'm so fucking busy. I don't want to, you know what I mean? I got too much going on. I really wanted to prepare.
Mm-hmm. And now that you're starting to put stuff up on your channel, I'll definitely check it out and subscribe.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Support you.
Yeah, and I'd like to. I got to get together with Scott and have him coach me up on how to host guests because I actually would be very interested in having some interviews and some discussions with you, Nell. I'd like Joel to come by. I've got some other people that want to come onto the channel, and so I just need to figure out how to tie all that together. With StreamYard, and I've never done the technical aspect of this kind of stuff before, so I've got a lot of questions. I'm hoping Scott will help me out, so I don't have to, struggle through all of it. It took me like 2 days to figure out how to fix my own fucking audio. If you look at my channel, I put up a video, my first video. I left it up there because it's so funny. But I was talking to myself for like 10 minutes before somebody jumped into my live and was like, "Hey, there's no audio. Nobody could hear you." It was fucking hilarious, bro. It was so funny. I started laughing so hard. So I did finally figure that out. But, I'm hoping that Scott can help me out with that.
I think this is Stephen from Hermetic Idealism. He says subjective morality translates into objective facing morality. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, so there's this idea, and I think this might be what he's getting at, is like, let's take something like, okay, the collective view is still stance dependent. So like everybody in the world would agree that eating shit probably doesn't taste good, right? Nobody wants to eat shit. But is it because shit actually tastes bad, objectively speaking, or we just all happen to share this aversion to eating our own shit, right? So it's this kind of this understanding that, yeah, technically, just because it seems like it's objective, because everybody agrees on it, we can say, well, eating shit can't be objectively bad tasting because taste is we know that taste is subjective. My favorite flavor of ice cream is chocolate. Your favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, right? So we all our taste buds, our flavors, our preferences are going to be subjective. So if everybody in the world agrees that eating shit doesn't taste good, does that then make it objective, or does it still say it's subjective, but it's outward facing, it looks objective? I think that's what they're getting at.
Right. So this is my question for you, objective ethics. You know how they say if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So why are you not a non-dualistic? Right. I don't understand. Everything you say is always non-dualistic. So I'm just kind of confused.
Yeah, it does. I know. That's right. No, I agree with you 100%. It's hilarious because I've thought about this. It's like, man, when I met you guys and started talking to you and stuff, like pretty much from the jump, I was like, wow, what these guys are talking about really resonates with my quote unquote worldview. If you want to put it in those terms, I don't necessarily know what a worldview even is, but it does. Like I said before, I live my life very much like I studied a lot of religions, over the years, as you guys know. in college and on a personal journey, I spent 3 decades in this kind of stuff, formally and informally. And Buddhism and the Eastern, Jainism and Taoism really resonate with me in a lot of ways. In fact, when I talk to religious people and I feel like they're on the ledge and they're trying to get off that religious ledge, but they're afraid that their life will divulge into nihilism, I always direct them towards Buddhism, which is technically atheist. It's an atheist religion, right? So, so I always direct them to Buddhism, because Buddhism and there's another way of life. It's yoga. A lot of people they just think it's like an exercise routine, but actually yoga really technically is a way of life. There's some different spiritual elements, meditation. You want to call it quote unquote spiritual, but that's where I always send people, to the non-violent religions. If you're gonna be religious, please be a Buddhist or something. Be a Jainist, or be a Taoist or something like that. Don't be a fucking Christian. Whatever you do, don't justify slavery. Don't get into a position where you have to try and justify slavery. Don't do it.
To me, that's what I always call comic book spirituality. Like, it's comic book. It's like flying men and walking on water people, and it's like comic book shit. Like, from what it sounds like from you, I just don't see the difference. Like, from everything I've heard you say ever so far up to now, everything that you say is very non-dual, because you embrace duality for what it is, but at the same time you understand it collapses into one, thing, whether it's one experience or one reality, or however you put it. And then your practices seem to be of a non-dualistic sort of practice, compassion, understanding, empathy, seeing, purpose and meaning in life through treating others as you see yourself in others and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just don't see the difference. But I mean, not that labels matter. I'm not saying that labels matter. But if you were going to say, well, I'm not actually a non-dualist yet, so I'm just not understanding that part. But I don't know. That's just me.
No, would you do me a favor, Scott? Would you mind putting the link to my channel in the chat so people can check it out? They could just go that way. And then I also want to highlight, while you're doing that, what fucking Cafe said is hilarious about his comment. I want to read this off. There's always one scat muncher who screws the pooch.
Sure. Exactly.
And technically speaking, now I don't have children, so I can't say for certain, but my understanding is that, some kids anyway, don't they go through I don't know if it's a phase that don't have, kids, they got to have at least one time in their life where they've got some shit, they're trying to figure life out. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe I'm just thinking I've just seen too many movies or something like that, but it seems to me that I'm sure some human beings at some point in their life, at some point in history, have tried at least once to eat some shit. I mean, it's probably happened.
Probably.
Yeah. It's like Brooklyn Lou. He's come out a few times. I've heard him make the statement that he identifies more as a non-dualist type of person, and so he said he's going to start trying to form arguments based on that, from what we were talking about. So it's just not really hard for him to see it, but I just wonder, what might it be that's sort of causing you to not that I'm making any criticism, I'm just really curious. I've been really curious about that. What is it that kind of holds you back?
Yeah, when I take a position on something, when I take a position on something, I try to limit my actual when I talked about, what can I know, and I broke it into 2 categories, right? You've got the empirical knowledge, and then you've got the practical certainty. So when I'm into either one of those categories, I like to be as justified as possible epistemically, right? So I don't have, because I haven't taken the time to, thank you, Joel. Good looking out, brother. I haven't taken the time to epistemically really put all the pieces together and do all the research that would be necessary for me to say that with all practical certainty, I'm a non-dualist because I just haven't put all those pieces together. And I also think that there might be some information that will come from the empirical knowledge side that will help me to make that final decision. So for me, it's, it's
if I might say
Go ahead.
so, and this is an observation about you, objective ethics, I think what really kind of seals the deal for you on a lot of things are the more practical level type stuff, like the I don't want to say scientific stuff because that sounds kind of weird, but more of the empirical, maybe sort of evidences. Those are kind of the things you really want to see intersect for sure, right?
Yeah, because I am not an empiricist or a materialist. I am a naturalist, however, but generally speaking, I do feel that in most ways, and I almost wonder if this can't be in all ways, but in most ways, even when it comes to our philosophical understanding, because there's some things that we use the scientific method for, right? The material world, how to gauge what's objectively true in the material world. But philosophy gives us the ability to logically understand what's happening in the immaterial world, if there is such a thing, right? Thoughts, we know, things of this nature, into the qualia of things, right? However, I don't think there needs to be this hard line between the two, because the way that we exist, the way that we live our life, the way that we function in life, both things cross over, right? There's both things. Like I was talking about the transgender thing, right? The respect factor that I did for my use of pronouns was based solely on the philosophical side of respect, right? And this type of a thing. Well, to actually make value judgments on the sports issue or the bathroom issue or prison, whatever you want to, whatever nuanced thing we want to break that down into, now we need to look at more of the empirical stuff. And so you need to have a combination of knowledge that comes from both the philosophical side and the scientific side. What is identity? What are the actual consequences, that can be judged? And so it's really a balance between the two. So if you see that that I feel we're talking about something that's completely empirical, like boats, for example, right? Like I build boats, right? So completely empirical. I will probably say I'm not comfortable making a factual statement about this until I look to see what the philosophical side is going to have to say about it. And then the reverse goes, if we're talking about something philosophical like non-dualism, I'm not going to make a commitment until I can see what the empirical side has to say about it. Because I believe that the complete knowledge is going to come from a combination of both aspects. Yeah, absolutely. I think quantum physics is really what the angle that I've been looking through is in quantum physics and quantum field theory. Superstring theory is what I'm currently breaking apart, but I only have so many hours in a day. So I've got my irons in so many fires, but yeah, quantum physics, definitely. I agree to 100%. That's the empirical side that I think is going to give us, whatever. I'm monopolizing the conversation. So go ahead, guys.
Next weekend, when we have this discussion on the block theories and stuff, I think I'm going to seal the deal with you on that. I think I'm going to leave it inescapable for you. I'm going to try to make it very inescapable. Nice. And I think that's what you're going to need, because it does sound like that. Like you mentioned, with the trans issues. You've got the politeness, you've got the the spirit of empathy and everything. It's just to really seal the deal, you're just going to need that empirical kind of connection. And it's very valid to be like that, because the thing about it is, if something is real and it's true, there should be intersection. That's one of the hallmarks of truth, is that it intersects on different various levels, not just one. Because if it's just one, that's just how shallow it is. But if it's intersecting on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different aspects, it eventually becomes kind of inescapable, logically, at least,
Yeah.
I agree. That's well said, Scott. That's well said.
In objective ethics, you're reminding me of a meme I came across earlier where it says, when I was in middle school, I learned there were only two genders. When I did my bachelor's in biology, I learned that there are also people who are intersex and the importance of the SRY gene. When I completed my master's in neuroscience, I learned that sex is already hard to define and gender is both social and in the brain, making everything a lot more complex. When people say it's basic biology, they are telling you they haven't moved past middle school.
You know you've hit rock bottom or you've made it to the top when people can start making memes out of you.
So yeah, it's like there's a lot of complexity to the whole, understanding trans people, and it's like people just want to put us in these oversimplified boxes when nature has already taught us that it's not that simple.
Yeah, I think that, and I might be getting this wrong because I could be misremembering, but I believe it was John Locke, the philosopher John Locke, who came up with the Prince and the Pauper thought experiment. You know, if you take the brain out of the prince and put it in the pauper, and you take the cobbler, whatever it is, prince and cobbler, right? You take the brain out of the cobbler and you put it in the prince, and you take the prince's brain and put it in the cobbler. Is the prince still the prince? And this leads to the question of identity. And Socrates, St. Thomas Aquinas, there are so many different models about what I is, what makes the I, how do we identify ourselves? How do we categorize other people? This is kind of what these guys bring up with Scott and Sophia earlier. The identity is this whole spectrum of different thought models. And it's fascinating to really look into. And one of the things that it's led me to understand is that we don't really fucking know. You know, we have to be very careful about taking stances on I am this or I am that. You just like the non-dualist versus dualist thing. Do we really know if we are an individual separate thing, or are we actually all connected, or is there anything at all outside of a brain in a vat, or is it just an energy field? I mean, there's so many questions that are out there that are fun to explore. But again, there's so many hours in a day. I've got a job I have to go to. I got to make money. I've got to spend time with my wife. I've got all this. I get to spend time with my wife. Sorry, I get to.
Wouldn't it be great if
so? Yeah,
there's
just
the lottery and we could spend our whole day talking about that'd be fucking awesome. Like that's all I care about is stuff like this, and it's so true, man. Like there's so much to learn and so much to dig into.
Oh yeah, no. If I ever won the lottery, I would quit my job and spend a lot of my time just getting degrees, at university.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, look, I'm going to go ahead and cut it short because we've been on for 3 hours, so I don't want to delay everybody and hold up their days. So, but it's been a great conversation, really fun, really passionate, very meaningful. So, yeah, we got one more comment here from Cafe. In Buddhism, they take a non-dualist approach. They see the ego as a fictitious identity, and their identity is within the unbroken wholeness of reality itself. Yeah, that's true. That's one of the things I was going to say is that it's all a matter of perspective, depending on what perspective you're talking about. Obviously, you have to have an ego and identity. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what mouth to put the fork. You've got to survive. On that perspective, it's very true. But maybe on another perspective, it's we're all just part of the block universe, Anyways, man, I'm going to let you guys go. And till next time, you guys have a good weekend for now. Y'all be good.